When a wealthy businessman grabbed a waitress by the wrist in a half-empty diner, everyone looked away, except one broken veteran with nothing left to lose. What he didn't know, the terrified girl he was protecting was worth $9 billion. This is the story of how one moment of courage sparked a war between power and principle that would expose secrets, destroy empires, and prove that sometimes the most dangerous person in the room is the one who refuses to stay silent. If you're watching from anywhere in the world, drop your city in the comments below. I want to see how far this story travels. Hit that like button and stay until the end, because what happens next will restore your faith in doing the right thing, even when it costs you everything. The rain came down in sheets that Wednesday night, hammering against the windows of the Bluebird Diner like thousands of tiny fists demanding entry. It was the kind of relentless downpour that turned city streets into rivers and made the neon sign outside flicker and buzz with electrical protest. Inside, the fluorescent lights cast everything in that particular shade of tired yellow that only exists in places where hope goes to rest between shifts. Ethan Cole sat alone in the corner booth, the same one he'd occupied every Wednesday and Friday for the past 3 months. His hands wrapped around a chipped ceramic mug that had seen better decades. The coffee inside long since gone cold. He didn't care. The warmth wasn't the point. The 20 minutes of sitting down was the point. The brief illusion of being something other than a man sprinting through life on a treadmill set too fast was the point. He was 34, but felt 50. The face that stared back at him from dark windows showed a man who'd aged in dog years, 7 for everyone since he'd come home from overseas. His dark hair, cut military short out of habit rather than regulation, showed premature gray at the temples. The scar that ran from his left eyebrow to his hairline had faded to a thin white line, barely noticeable unless you knew to look for it. His daughter had traced it with small fingers once, asking if it hurt. He'd lied and said no. The diner was nearly empty, which was exactly why Ethan chose it. 3 other customers scattered across the space like islands. An elderly man reading a newspaper at the counter, his coffee refilled so many times the cup probably had its own gravitational field. A young couple in a booth near the door, leaning close and whispering with the intensity of people either falling in love or plotting a crime. And a businessman in an expensive suit near the windows, the kind of suit that cost more than Ethan made in 3 months. The businessman had been there when Ethan arrived, phone pressed to his ear, voice carrying across the diner with the particular arrogance of someone who'd never been told to lower it. Victor Hale. Ethan hadn't needed to hear the name to know the type. He'd seen 1,000 versions of him in 1,000 different contexts. The watch that cost more than a car, the shoes that probably required their own insurance policy. The posture of a man who'd learned early that the world bent to accommodate him, and had never been given reason to question that fundamental truth. Ethan had learned to read people in situations where misreading them meant body bags. The skill hadn't left him just because the uniform had. Victor Hale radiated the particular energy of a predator who'd never encountered meaningful resistance. It was in the way he gestured while talking, claiming space. It was in the way he'd snapped his fingers at the waitress, actually snapped his fingers, like summoning a dog, when he wanted his water refilled. The waitress was young, maybe 23 or 24, with dark hair pulled back in a practical ponytail and the kind of pretty that hadn't yet learned it could be weaponized. Her name tag read Lena in fading letters. She moved through her section with the efficient grace of someone who'd mastered the art of being simultaneously present and invisible, there to serve, but not to be noticed. Ethan recognized that skill too. He'd spent a lifetime perfecting it. She'd refilled Victor's water without comment, without eye contact, maintaining the professional distance that service workers learn or they don't survive. But Victor had noticed her the way a shark notices blood in the water, with immediate and total focus. "Hey, sweetheart," Victor called out, his voice cutting through the diner's ambient noise like a knife. "Another scotch, top shelf this time. And make it a double." Lena turned from the table she was clearing, her smile professionally fixed in place. "Of course, sir. I'll have that right out." "You know," Victor said, leaning back in his booth with the sprawl of someone claiming territory, "you're much prettier when you smile like that. You should do it more often." The air in the diner changed, subtle, but Ethan felt it like a drop in barometric pressure before a storm. The old man at the counter suddenly found his newspaper fascinating. The young couple's whispers stopped. Lena's smile didn't waver, but something in her eyes hardened. "I'll get that drink for you," she said, her voice carefully neutral. She disappeared into the kitchen. Victor watched her go, his expression one of casual assessment, like he was evaluating livestock. Then he returned to his phone call, laughing too loud at something the person on the other end said. Ethan tried to return his attention to his own coffee, his own problems. He had a double shift starting at the warehouse in 6 hours. Before that, he needed to get home, relieve Mrs. Chen from watching his daughter, help with homework if Sophie was still awake, pack tomorrow's lunch, and maybe, if the universe was feeling generous, get 3 hours of sleep. He couldn't afford to get involved in other people's drama. He couldn't afford anything that might risk the precarious Jenga tower of his life toppling over. But his hands were already tense around his mug. His jaw was already tight. And some part of him that hadn't died in the sand and blood of places whose names he still couldn't say out loud was already preparing for what he knew was coming. Lena emerged from the kitchen carrying Victor's scotch on a small tray, her posture careful, professional. She set the drink on his table with practiced precision, starting to turn away before he could engage her in conversation. "Wait," Victor said, and there was something new in his voice now, something uglier. He'd been drinking steadily since Ethan had arrived, and the alcohol was stripping away the thin veneer of civility. "I asked you a question earlier about that smile." "Sir, I'm very busy tonight." "The place is empty," Victor interrupted, gesturing broadly at the nearly vacant diner. "You're not busy. You're just rude." Lena's professional mask slipped for just a second, revealing something raw underneath. Fear, yes, but also anger. "I'm just trying to do my job, sir. If there's nothing else, there is something else." Victor stood up, and the movement was sudden enough to make Lena take an instinctive step back. He was tall, maybe 6'2", with the kind of build that came from expensive gym memberships and personal trainers. "I've been sitting here for an hour, being very patient, very polite. I've tipped well. And I think the least you could do is be a little friendlier." "I'm sorry if I've been unfriendly," Lena said, her voice shaking slightly now. "But I need to—" Victor reached out and grabbed her wrist. It wasn't a violent gesture, not exactly, not the kind of thing that would look dramatic on security footage. Just a hand closing around her wrist, holding her in place. But Ethan saw the way Lena's whole body went rigid, the way her breath caught, the way her eyes darted toward the kitchen, calculating distance and escape routes. The old man at the counter turned his attention very deliberately back to his newspaper. The young couple suddenly needed to study their phones with great intensity. The cook, visible through the kitchen window very carefully, didn't look up from his grill. Everyone saw. No one moved. Ethan was on his feet before he made the conscious decision to stand. His body remembered what his mind sometimes tried to forget, that there were moments when hesitation meant death, that the space between seeing a threat and neutralizing it needed to be measured in heartbeats, not thoughts, that sometimes the only thing standing between an innocent person and harm was the willingness to step into the gap. He crossed the diner in 6 strides, his worn work boots silent on the checkered floor despite his size. He was 6 feet even, not as tall as Victor, but broader through the shoulders, his frame still carrying the muscle memory of a body that had once been weapon and shield both. The years of grueling physical labor since leaving the service had kept him hard in ways that gym memberships couldn't replicate. "Let her go." The words came out quiet, almost conversational. Ethan had learned long ago that volume wasn't what made words dangerous. Certainty was what made them dangerous. And he'd never been more certain of anything. Victor looked up, his hand still locked around Lena's wrist, his expression cycling through confusion, then annoyance, then something approaching amusement. "Excuse me." "Let her go," Ethan repeated, still in that same quiet tone. "Right now." Victor's grip loosened slightly, but he didn't release Lena. Instead, he gave Ethan the kind of long, assessing look that men like him gave to obstacles, evaluating, calculating, deciding whether to go around or through. His eyes cataloged Ethan's worn jeans, his faded jacket with the frayed collar, his work boots that had been resoled twice and would need it again soon. "This is a private conversation," Victor said, his voice dripping with condescension. "Between me and the lady. Why don't you go back to your—" He glanced at Ethan's table, at the single cup of cheap coffee. Whatever it is poor people do in diners at this hour. Lena was looking at Ethan now, her eyes wide with a complicated mixture of hope and fear. Her wrist was still trapped in Victor's grip, his fingers white against her skin from the pressure. "Last chance," Ethan said. His voice hadn't risen, but something in it had changed. It was the voice that had once convinced frightened 19-year-olds to follow him into buildings that might be rigged with explosives. It was the voice that had talked down armed insurgents when bullets would have been easier. It was the voice of a man who'd been tested in ways that stripped away all the bullshit and left only the essential truth of who you were. Victor laughed, actually laughed. Or what? You'll what? Exactly. The diner had gone completely silent except for the rain and the quiet hum of the refrigeration units. The old man had abandoned all pretense of reading his paper. The young couple was frozen, watching with the horrified fascination of people watching a car crash unfold in slow motion. Ethan didn't respond to the question. He didn't need to. Instead, he did something that Victor Hale, in his 43 years of existence, had almost never experienced. He waited. He stood there, absolutely still, his hands relaxed at his sides, his breathing calm and even. But his eyes were locked on Victor's with an intensity that was its own kind of violence. They were the eyes of a man who'd seen actual combat, who'd made life and death decisions while his ears were still ringing from explosions, who'd carried wounded friends through hostile territory and somehow kept them alive through sheer refusal to accept any other outcome. They were not the eyes of someone who made empty threats. Something in Victor's expression shifted. Some primitive part of his brain, the part that evolution had designed to recognize predators, was suddenly sending up warning signals his conscious mind couldn't quite dismiss. The hand around Lena's wrist loosened further. But Victor Hale hadn't built a fortune by backing down. And he'd certainly never backed down to someone who looked like they bought their clothes at thrift stores. "Do you know who I am?" Victor asked, his voice hardening. "Do you have any idea who you're talking to?" "Someone who's about to let go of that girl's wrist," Ethan said, "or someone who's going to regret not letting go. Either way, we're about to find out who you are." Victor's face flushed red. "I could buy and sell you. I could make one phone call and destroy your pathetic little life. You could let her go," Ethan interrupted, still in that maddeningly calm voice. "That's what you could do. Right now. Before this becomes something you can't undo with money." For a long moment, the two men stood there, locked in a silent contest of wills that had nothing to do with words and everything to do with the fundamental question of who would bend first. The rain hammered against the windows. The fluorescent lights hummed. Somewhere in the kitchen, a timer beeped and was quickly silenced. Then Victor did something that surprised everyone, including himself. He let go. Lena stumbled back immediately, cradling her wrist against her chest, red marks already visible where his fingers had been. She looked between Victor and Ethan with wide eyes, her professional composure completely shattered. "Thank you," she whispered to Ethan, her voice barely audible. For half a second, Ethan thought it might actually end there, that Victor would retreat to his booth, finish his overpriced scotch, and disappear into whatever luxury vehicle was waiting outside. That common sense and basic self-preservation would win out over ego. He should have known better. Victor's hand darted out again, this time reaching not for Lena but toward Ethan, whether to shove him or grab him or simply reassert dominance through physical contact. It was a stupid move, the kind of thing drunk men with too much confidence and too little experience did when they confused money with power and power with invincibility. Ethan's response was so fast it looked almost casual. His hand came up and caught Victor's wrist mid-reach, his grip iron hard but controlled. Not breaking, not twisting, not causing damage, just stopping, just saying, with absolute clarity, "No." "Don't," Ethan said, and now there was something in his voice that made Lena take another step back. It was the voice of a man who'd stood in doorways with his weapon raised, who'd made decisions measured in fractions of seconds that meant the difference between going home and going home in a flag-draped box. "You really, really don't want to do this." Victor tried to pull his hand free. Couldn't. Tried again, putting his whole body into it. Ethan's grip didn't budge. The businessman's eyes widened as he realized, perhaps for the first time in his adult life, that his will was completely irrelevant to the outcome of the situation. Let go of me, Victor hissed, his voice tight with a rage that was at least 50% humiliation. Let go of me right now, or I swear to God. You'll what? Ethan asked, and his voice was almost gentle. Call the police? Please do. I'm sure they'd love to hear about you assaulting your waitress. I didn't assault anyone. Victor's voice had risen to a shout now. She's being oversensitive. I was just trying to talk to her. You're the one assaulting me. You grabbed me. After you grabbed her, Ethan said. After you grabbed her first. After she asked you to stop. After she tried to walk away. See how that works? The diner door opened with a blast of rain-soaked wind, and two men walked in. They were both large, both wearing dark suits that didn't quite hide the bulk of their shoulders, both moving with the particular awareness of professional security. Victor's eyes went to them immediately, and something like triumph flashed across his face. Marcus, he called out, his voice regaining some of its earlier confidence. Marcus, this man just assaulted me. I want him removed immediately. The two security personnel moved toward them with the unhurried confidence of men who'd handled situations like this before. They took in the scene quickly, their employer standing with his wrist held by a man in work clothes, a frightened waitress backing away, a mostly empty diner full of witnesses who were very carefully not looking at anyone. Sir, the one called Marcus said, addressing Ethan, I'm going to need you to let go of Mr. Hale and step back. Ethan looked at him calmly. Is he going to put his hands on her again? Marcus's expression didn't change. I'm not going to ask you again. Let go and step back. For a moment, Ethan considered his options. He was outnumbered, outgunned in terms of legal firepower and resources, and probably about 30 seconds away from having the police called. Sophie was at home, probably already asleep, completely dependent on him showing up tomorrow morning to make her breakfast and get her on the school bus. Mrs. Chen would worry if he didn't come home. His boss at the warehouse already thought he was unreliable. He couldn't afford any complications. He let go of Victor's wrist and took 2 steps back, his hands raised slightly in a gesture of non-aggression. Victor immediately began rubbing his wrist, his face twisted in theatrical pain. You saw that, he said to his security team. You saw him attack me, unprovoked. I want him arrested. I want charges pressed. I saw you grab the waitress first, Ethan said quietly. So did everyone else here. I did no such thing. Victor's voice had reached a register usually reserved for operatic tenors. I was simply trying to get her attention. She was ignoring me. She was being deliberately rude and dismissive, and when I tried to speak with her, this psychopath attacked me. Marcus looked at Lena, who was still clutching her wrist, her whole body trembling. Ma'am, did Mr. Hale grab you? Lena's eyes darted between the security guards, Victor, Ethan, and the door to the kitchen where her manager was presumably hiding. Her mouth opened, closed, opened again. The weight of the decision pressed down on her with almost physical force. Tell the truth, and potentially lose her job and any chance of justice in a legal system built for people like Victor Hale, or lie and let this stranger who'd tried to help her take the fall alone. She began, her voice shaking. She's going to lie, Victor interrupted, his confidence returning now that he had backup. She's going to lie because she's scared of losing her job. But I have witnesses. I have my associates who saw this man attack me. I saw him grab her. Everyone turned. The old man at the counter had set down his newspaper and was looking at them with clear, steady eyes. His voice was quiet but certain, with the particular kind of authority that comes with age and the knowledge that you've lived long enough to stop caring what anyone thinks. I saw Mr. Hale grab the young lady's wrist, he continued. I saw her try to pull away. I saw him hold on. And then I saw this gentleman, he nodded at Ethan, ask him politely to let go, twice. When Mr. Hale refused, the gentleman helped persuade him. That's what I saw. Victor's face went from red to purple. You senile old... I saw it too. The young woman from the couple near the door had stood up, her phone in her hand, her boyfriend looking up at her with wide eyes. I recorded part of it. Not the beginning, but the part where you grabbed his wrist and he told you to stop. I got that. The air went out of Victor like a punctured tire. He stared at the young woman, at her phone, at the undeniable reality that his preferred narrative was crumbling around him in real time. Marcus looked at his colleague, some silent communication passing between them. Then he looked at Victor with the expression of a man who'd just realized his paycheck wasn't worth this particular headache. "Mr. Hale," he said carefully, "perhaps we should leave, before this escalates further." "I'm not going anywhere." Victor's voice had taken on a manic quality now, the desperation of a man who could feel control slipping through his fingers like water. "I'm the victim here. I'm being assaulted and harassed, and I want the police called. I want this man arrested. I want—" The diner door opened again, and this time it was an actual police officer, rain dripping from her uniform jacket, her hand resting casually on her belt near her radio. She took in the scene with the practiced assessment of someone who'd walked into 1,000 domestic disturbances, bar fights, and late-night confrontations. "Evening," she said, her voice carrying the particular tone of authority that doesn't need to be raised to be obeyed. "We got a call about a disturbance. Someone want to tell me what's going on?" Victor opened his mouth, ready to launch into his version of events, but the officer held up a hand. "One at a time," she said. "You, in the work clothes. You first." Ethan took a breath, organized his thoughts, and told the truth. All of it. The harassment, the grab, the refusal to let go. His intervention, Victor's attempt to grab him, his defensive response. He spoke clearly, calmly, without embellishment or emotion. Just facts, delivered in chronological order. When he finished, the officer turned to Lena. "Ma'am?" Lena looked at Ethan, at the old man who'd spoken up for her, at the young woman still holding her phone with its incriminating video. Then she straightened her spine, lifted her chin, and told her truth. "He grabbed my wrist," she said, her voice gaining strength with each word. "I asked him to let go. He didn't. This man," she gestured to Ethan, "helped me. That's what happened." The officer nodded, made some notes, then turned to Victor. "Sir?" Victor's lawyer brain was finally catching up to his alcohol-soaked outrage. He could see the way this was going, the testimonies aligning against him, the video evidence, the multiple witnesses. But men like Victor Hale didn't get rich by accepting defeat gracefully. "I want to press charges," he said, his voice cold now, calculating. "Against him. For assault. I have expensive attorneys on retainer, and I will pursue this to the fullest extent of the law. That man put his hands on me without my consent. That's assault, officer. Clear and simple." The officer looked at Ethan, at Victor, at the collection of witnesses who just finished corroborating a story that contradicted Victor's narrative entirely. She sighed the way cops sigh when they know they're about to do paperwork that won't matter in 6 months. "Sir," she said to Ethan, "I'm going to need you to come with me to the station, to give a formal statement." Ethan felt something cold settle in his chest. Not fear, exactly. More like resignation. The knowledge that he'd done the right thing and was about to be punished for it anyway, because that's how the world worked when you didn't have expensive lawyers and unlimited resources. "Am I under arrest?" he asked quietly. "Not at this time, but Mr. Hale has made a complaint, and we need to document everything properly." "I understand." Ethan reached for his wallet, pulling out 3 crumpled dollar bills to leave on his table for the coffee he hadn't finished. His hands were steady, despite everything. "Can I make a phone call first? I have a daughter at home. Someone needs to know I'm going to be late." The officer's expression softened slightly. "You can make your call from the station." As Ethan moved toward the door, Lena stepped forward, her earlier fear replaced with something else. "Wait, officer, he was helping me. He didn't do anything wrong. Please, you can't—" "It'll be fine," Ethan said, meeting her eyes. He tried for a reassuring smile and almost managed it. "Tell the truth. That's all any of us can do." The old man at the counter caught his eye as he passed, giving him a small nod of respect, warrior to warrior across the generations. The young woman held up her phone. "I'm sending this video to my email and cloud storage right now. They can't delete it." Ethan nodded his thanks and walked out into the rain, the officer beside him, Victor Hale's smug expression burning into his back like a brand. The police car's lights painted the wet street in alternating red and blue, the colors reflecting off puddles like spilled paint. As he ducked into the back seat, not cuffed, not arrested, but not free either, Ethan thought about Sophie. probably dreaming in her small bed in their small apartment. He thought about Mrs. Chen, who'd be worried when he didn't come home on time. He thought about his job at the warehouse, his boss who was one missed shift away from firing him, the carefully balanced house of cards that was his entire life. He thought about all of it, and then he pushed it aside. Because somewhere in that diner, a young woman named Lena was safe. At least for tonight. At least because one person had refused to look away when everyone else did. And whatever came next, whatever price he had to pay for that choice, at least his daughter would grow up knowing her father was the kind of man who stood up when it mattered, even if standing up cost him everything. The car pulled away from the curb, windshield wipers beating against the relentless rain. Through the rear window, Ethan could see Victor Hale standing under the diner's awning, phone already pressed to his ear, making the first of what would be many calls to very expensive people who specialized in making problems disappear. But Ethan had fought in places where money and power and threats meant nothing against the simple truth of what was right. He'd survived worse than whatever Victor Hale could throw at him. Or so he thought. He had no way of knowing that in a luxury apartment across the city, the young woman he'd just defended was staring at her phone with shaking hands, not because she was afraid, but because she was about to make a call that would turn this entire situation inside out. He had no way of knowing that Lena Ward wasn't even her real name. And he definitely had no way of knowing that sometimes, when you defend a stranger in a diner, you're actually stepping into a war that's been building for years, just waiting for someone with nothing to lose and everything to prove to strike the first match. The rain continued to fall. The city continued to turn. And in a police station on the east side, Ethan Cole sat in an interrogation room and waited to see what happened when ordinary people tried to do the right thing in a world built for those who could afford to be wrong. He'd fought for his country once. He'd survived tours that had broken better men. He'd come home to a life that hadn't wanted him back, to a wife who'd left, to a daughter who needed him to be more than he knew how to be. But he'd never stopped fighting, and he wasn't about to start now. The interrogation room smelled like industrial cleaner and desperation, a combination Ethan had encountered before in military holding facilities halfway around the world. The walls were that particular shade of institutional beige that seemed designed to drain hope from anyone who stared at them too long. A metal table bolted to the floor, 2 chairs that had seen better decades, a mirror that everyone knew was two-way glass but nobody acknowledged, and a clock on the wall that ticked with the slow, methodical rhythm of bureaucracy grinding forward. Ethan sat with his hands folded on the table, his posture straight but not tense, his breathing even. Waiting was a skill he'd mastered in places where impatience got you killed. He'd waited in buildings that might collapse, in vehicles that might explode, in situations where the difference between living and dying was measured in the patience to let the moment come to you instead of rushing toward it. The door opened and 2 detectives walked in. The first was a woman in her mid-40s with steel-gray hair pulled back in a severe bun, and eyes that had seen too much to be shocked by anything. Her badge read, Detective Sarah Morrison. The second was younger, maybe 30, with the eager energy of someone still convinced that police work was about justice rather than paperwork. Detective James Chen. Morrison set a folder on the table but didn't open it. Instead, she studied Ethan with the kind of assessment that went beyond surface details. She was looking for tells, for weaknesses, for the story beneath the story. Mr. Cole, she began, her voice neutral, do you know why you're here? Because a rich man doesn't like being told no, Ethan said quietly, and he has the resources to make that my problem instead of his. Morrison's expression didn't change, but something flickered in her eyes. Maybe respect. Maybe amusement. Maybe just recognition of a truth she'd seen play out 1,000 times before. Tell me what happened tonight, from the beginning. Ethan told the story again, with the same precision and lack of embellishment he'd used with the officer at the diner. Facts only. Chronological order, no interpretation, no emotion, no attempt to paint himself as heroic or Victor as villainous. Just what happened, in the order it happened. When he finished, Chen leaned forward. So you admit you grabbed Mr. Hale's wrist? After he grabbed mine, Ethan clarified. After he'd already grabbed the waitress. After she asked him to stop. After I asked him to stop. Twice. Yes, I grabbed his wrist to prevent him from putting his hands on me. Mr. Hale says you assaulted him unprovoked, Morrison said, watching Ethan's face carefully. He says you approached his table aggressively, made threats, and physically attacked him when he tried to defend himself. Then Mr. Hale is lying, Ethan said simply. And you have multiple witnesses who will confirm that. We do, Morrison agreed. She opened the folder and pulled out several sheets of paper. We have statements from 3 witnesses. An elderly gentleman named Harold Chen, no relation. She nodded at her partner. A young woman named Jessica Martinez who also provided video evidence. And the waitress, whose name we're having some trouble verifying. Something in the way she said that last part made Ethan's attention sharpen. What do you mean, trouble verifying? Morrison exchanged a glance with her partner. The manager of the diner says her name is Lena Ward, but the social security number on her employment paperwork doesn't match anyone by that name in the system. The address she listed is a vacant lot. Her emergency contact is a disconnected number. Ethan felt a cold weight settle in his stomach. You think she gave a fake name? We think, Chen said carefully, that the young woman you defended tonight might not be who she claims to be, which raises some interesting questions about what actually happened and why. What happened is exactly what I told you, Ethan said, his voice hardening slightly. A man harassed and grabbed a woman who was just trying to do her job. Whether her name is really Lena Ward or not doesn't change that. It changes whether we can find her to corroborate your story, Morrison pointed out. She left the diner about 20 minutes after you did. The manager says she grabbed her things from her locker and walked out. No explanation, no 2 weeks' notice, just gone. Her phone number goes to voicemail. She's vanished. The weight in Ethan's stomach got heavier. He thought about the way Lena had looked at him before he left, the complicated mixture of gratitude and fear in her eyes. He'd assumed the fear was about the situation, about Victor Hale and his threats and his power. But maybe it had been about something else entirely. So where does that leave me? He asked. Technically, Morrison closed the folder. In a difficult position. You admitted to grabbing Mr. Hale. He wants to press charges. Without the waitress to confirm that she was being harassed first, this becomes your word against his. And Mr. Hale has already retained a very expensive attorney who's making very expensive noises about lawsuits and prosecution. And the other witnesses? They confirm part of your story, but they didn't see the initial harassment clearly. Mr. Martinez's video starts after the confrontation was already in progress. It shows you grabbing Mr. Hale's wrist, but it doesn't clearly show him grabbing you first. A good attorney could argue that you were the aggressor, and he was defending himself. Ethan felt the familiar sensation of walls closing in, of options narrowing, of the world shrinking down to a series of increasingly bad choices. He'd felt this before, in ambushes and firefights, in moments where every direction looked like death, and the only question was which death you chose. So what happens now? He asked. Chen pulled out a business card and slid it across the table. Now you get a lawyer, a good one, because Mr. Hale's attorney is already talking about assault charges, civil suits, restraining orders, and making an example of you. Making an example, Ethan repeated quietly. For what? Stopping him from hurting someone? For embarrassing him, Morrison said, and there was something almost sympathetic in her voice now. For making him look weak in front of witnesses. For being in the wrong place at the wrong time and thinking that doing the right thing would protect you. She stood up, gathering her folder. You're free to go, Mr. Cole, for now, but I'd strongly suggest you find legal representation before the sun comes up. Men like Victor Hale don't make threats they don't intend to follow through on. Ethan took the business card, though he had no idea how he'd afford the attorney whose name was printed on it in tasteful serif font. He stood, his body protesting slightly from the hours of sitting, and moved toward the door. Mr. Cole, Morrison called after him. He turned back. Off the record? You did the right thing tonight, but doing the right thing and surviving the consequences of doing the right thing are 2 very different skills. Make sure you learn the second one before it's too late. The station's fluorescent lights felt even harsher than the interrogation rooms had been. Ethan found a payphone in the lobby, one of the last ones still functioning in the city, and called Mrs. Chen Collect. She answered on the 3rd ring, her voice thick with sleep but sharpening immediately when she heard his voice. Ethan, where are you? I've been worried sick. Sophie kept asking. I'm fine, Mrs. Chen. I'm at the police station. There was an incident, but I'm okay. I'm coming home now. Is Sophie? She's asleep. I told her you had to work late. She made you a picture to take to work tomorrow. A rainbow. Mrs. Chen's voice cracked slightly. Ethan, what kind of incident? Are you in trouble? The kind that I'll tell you about when I get home. I'm sorry for worrying you. I'll be there in 30 minutes. He hung up before she could ask more questions he didn't have good answers for. The rain had stopped, leaving the city washed clean and smelling of wet asphalt and new beginnings that probably wouldn't last past sunrise. Ethan walked the 45 minutes home because he couldn't afford a cab and the buses had stopped running an hour ago. His neighborhood looked different at 3 in the morning, quieter, but also more honest somehow. The storefronts that tried to look cheerful during the day showed their true faces in the darkness. The cracked windows, the fading paint, the desperate hope disguised as commerce. The apartment building where he lived with Sophie had been grand once, probably 70 years ago. Now it was just tired like everything else in this part of the city. Mrs. Chen met him at the door, her face creased with worry and questions she was too kind to ask at this hour. Ethan pressed 2 of his last 3 $20 bills into her hand despite her protests, thanked her quietly, and locked the door behind her as she shuffled back to her own apartment down the hall. The apartment was small, a 1-bedroom that he'd converted into a 1.5 by hanging a curtain to give Sophie her own space. Her drawings covered the refrigerator like wallpaper. Spelling tests with gold stars, a photograph of the 2 of them at the park, both of them laughing at something the camera had missed. The detritus of a life being built from whatever materials were available. He checked on Sophie, who was curled up in her small bed clutching a stuffed elephant that had been a gift from her mother before she'd left. Sophie's face in sleep still had the roundness of childhood, innocent and unworried by the calculations that dominated adult life. She had his dark hair but her mother's delicate features, and sometimes looking at her hurt in ways Ethan couldn't quite name. He kissed her forehead gently and retreated to his own space, a mattress on the floor in what might generously be called the living room, surrounded by milk crates that served as storage and a folding table that was his desk, dining table, and workspace all in one. Sleep didn't come. Ethan lay staring at the ceiling, watching shadows shift as occasional cars passed outside, their headlights painting temporary stories across the walls. He thought about Victor Hale and expensive attorneys, and the way the world bent toward people with resources. He thought about Lena, who wasn't Lena, who'd vanished the moment things got complicated, leaving him to face the consequences alone. But mostly, he thought about whether he'd do it again, knowing what he knew now, knowing the price, knowing the risk. And the answer, despite everything, was still yes. Because what was the alternative? Looking away? Letting fear and practicality turn him into the kind of person who could watch someone being hurt and justify doing nothing? He'd seen what happened to people who made those choices, who let the compromises add up until they couldn't remember what they'd originally stood for. He'd seen it in soldiers who'd crossed lines they swore they never would. He'd seen it in himself, in moments he still couldn't think about without something dark and cold settling in his chest. No. Whatever came next, at least he'd know he was still himself. Still Ethan. Still the man his daughter deserved to have raising her. His phone buzzed with a text message. Unknown number. He almost didn't open it, assuming it was spam or a wrong number, but something made him tap the screen. The message was short. I'm sorry, I should have stayed. I should have told them everything. This is my fault, not yours. I'm going to fix this. I promise. L. Ethan stared at the message for a long moment, reading implications and questions between the words. Then he typed a response. Who are you really? The reply came almost immediately. Someone who should have been honest from the start. Someone who owes you more than an apology. Someone who's about to make some calls that are going to change everything. Watch the news tomorrow. And Ethan, thank you. Not many people would have done what you did. Before he could respond, another message appeared. This number will stop working after I send this. They can't know I contacted you. Not yet. But I promise you won't face this alone. I keep my promises. The messages stopped. When Ethan tried to call the number back, he got an automated message saying it was no longer in service. He set the phone down and lay back, adding this new mystery to the collection already occupying his mind. He must have eventually fallen asleep, because the next thing he knew, Sophie was shaking his shoulder gently. her small voice cutting through the fog of exhaustion. Daddy, Daddy, you're going to be late for work, and you didn't eat dinner last night. Mrs. Chen said you worked really late. Are you sick? Ethan forced his eyes open, forced his body upright, forced himself into the performance of being a functioning adult. The clock read 6:15. His shift at the warehouse started at 7. He had 45 minutes to get himself and Sophie ready, drop her at the bus stop, and somehow make it across the city. I'm fine, sweetheart. Just tired. Did you do your homework? All done. And I made you a picture. Want to see? The rainbow she'd drawn was taped to the refrigerator, bright and hopeful and utterly unconcerned with the realities of legal threats and expensive attorneys and the way the world punished people for trying to help. Ethan stared at it while making Sophie's breakfast. Cereal with the last of the milk, toast with the store-brand jelly she didn't know was the cheap kind. It's beautiful, Soph. The best rainbow I've ever seen. She beamed at him with the kind of pure joy that existed only in children who hadn't yet learned that praise could be empty or manipulative. Then her expression shifted, becoming more serious. Daddy, are you in trouble? The question hit him harder than he expected. Why would you ask that? Because you look like you did when Mommy left. Kind of sad and scared at the same time, but trying not to show it. She tilted her head, studying him with those two perceptive eyes. You always think I don't notice, but I do. Ethan knelt down so they were at eye level, his hands on her small shoulders. I'm not in trouble, baby. I just had a long night at work. Sometimes grown-up stuff is complicated, but it's nothing for you to worry about, okay? Okay. She didn't sound entirely convinced, but she accepted the answer the way children do, filing it away for later consideration. Can we have pancakes this weekend? The kind with chocolate chips? Absolutely. Saturday morning, chocolate chip pancakes. You have my word. He got her to the bus stop on time, watched the yellow monstrosity swallow her up along with 24 other kids, and then started the long walk to the warehouse. His phone buzzed repeatedly during the journey, calls from numbers he didn't recognize, probably reporters or Victor Hale's attorney or other complications he couldn't afford to deal with. He ignored all of them. The warehouse foreman, Carl, was waiting when Ethan arrived, his expression somewhere between annoyed and concerned. Cole, my office. Now. Ethan's stomach dropped. He followed Carl through the warehouse, past pallets and forklifts and workers who studiously avoided making eye contact. Carl's office was a glass box overlooking the warehouse floor, filled with clipboards and OSHA posters, and the desperate organization of a man trying to maintain control of chaos. Carl closed the door and gestured for Ethan to sit. I got a call this morning from a law firm I can't even pronounce the name of. They wanted to know about your employment here, your work schedule, your reliability. They asked if you'd ever been violent or aggressive with coworkers. And what did you tell them? I told them to get a warrant if they wanted information about my employees. Carl leaned back in his chair, which creaked in protest. But then I Googled your name, and the first 5 results are all about you assaulting some businessman in a diner last night. Want to tell me what the hell happened? Ethan told the story for the 3rd time, and with each retelling it felt less like truth and more like performance. The words were the same, the facts unchanged, but something about repetition made them feel hollow. Carl listened without interrupting, his expression unreadable. When Ethan finished, he was quiet for a long moment. You know I can't have this kind of attention on my warehouse, Carl finally said. I got corporate breathing down my neck, insurance people asking questions, clients who don't want their shipments handled by some guy who's all over the internet for assault. I understand. Ethan kept his voice level even as he felt the foundation of his life cracking beneath him. If you need me to resign, I didn't say that. Carl pulled out a folder and slid it across the desk. Inside were printouts of news articles, all from the last hour, all with headlines that made Ethan's chest tighten. Rich businessman assaulted by veteran. Diner dispute turns violent. Homeless veteran attacks customer. I'm not homeless, Ethan said quietly, fixating on the one detail he could correct. Doesn't matter what's true. Matters what people believe. And right now the story being told is that you're some unhinged vet with PTSD who attacked an innocent customer for no reason. Carl tapped the articles. These all came out in the last hour, Professional hit pieces, all of them. Someone's paying good money to destroy your reputation before you can defend yourself. Ethan felt something cold and familiar settling in his chest. He'd seen information warfare before, had been trained in it, knew how narratives could be shaped and deployed as weapons more effective than bullets, but he'd never been the target of it. So what do I do? You get a lawyer. A real one, not some public defender who's handling 50 cases at once. You fight back. Carl stood up, extending his hand. And in the meantime, you keep showing up for work. I don't care what those vultures say. I've worked with you for 3 months and you've been nothing but reliable. Until I see evidence otherwise, you're still on my crew. Ethan shook his hand, surprised by the solidarity. Thank you. Don't thank me yet. This is going to get worse before it gets better. Men like the one you stood up to don't like being embarrassed. They'll use every resource they have to make you regret it. Carl walked him to the door. But you did the right thing, Cole. That still counts for something. At least it should. The shift passed in a blur of physical labor that was almost meditative in its simplicity. Lift boxes, move pallets, load trucks. Simple tasks that required muscle and attention, but not thought, giving Ethan's mind space to process what was happening. During his lunch break, he finally listened to his voicemails. The first 3 were reporters asking for comments, their voices professionally sympathetic in that way that promised they'd twist whatever he said into something sensational. The 4th was from Victor Hale's attorney, a woman whose voice was all expensive education and practiced menace. Mr. Cole, this is Patricia Westmore from Westmore & Associates. I represent Victor Hale in the matter of last night's assault. I'm calling to inform you that my client intends to pursue both criminal and civil remedies unless you're willing to discuss a settlement. Please contact my office at your earliest convenience. I should warn you that the longer you delay, the more difficult this situation becomes, for everyone involved. The implied threat was clear: cooperate or be destroyed. The 5th message was different. A male voice, younger, less polished. Mr. Cole, my name is David Park. I'm an attorney with the Public Advocacy Clinic. I saw the news reports this morning, and I'd like to offer my services pro bono if you're interested. I have some experience with cases involving power imbalances and wrongful prosecution. My number is... Ethan called the number back immediately. David Park answered on the 2nd ring, his voice carrying the particular energy of someone who ran on passion rather than sleep. Mr. Cole, thank you for calling back. I know this must be overwhelming, but I want you to know you have options. I've been reviewing the publicly available information, and I think we have a strong defense based on the witness statements and the video evidence. The detective said the video doesn't clearly show him grabbing me first. It doesn't need to. It shows you exercising reasonable restraint while under threat. It shows you not escalating beyond what was necessary. Combined with the testimony from the diner witnesses, we can establish that you were acting in defense of another person and yourself. David's enthusiasm was almost contagious. But here's the thing, this isn't really about the criminal case. Mr. Hale knows he probably can't get you convicted with the evidence as it stands. What he's doing is using the legal system as a weapon to financially destroy you before you ever see the inside of a courtroom. Can he do that? If you can't afford attorneys to fight back? Absolutely. He can file motion after motion, drag this out for months or years, force you to spend money you don't have defending yourself. Eventually, most people in your position settle just to make it stop, sign agreements that include non-disparagement clauses, essentially buying their silence. David paused. But that's only if you're fighting alone. And if I'm not? Then we make this very public, very messy, and very expensive for Mr. Hale. We file countersuits for harassment, for abuse of process, for intentional infliction of emotional distress. We get the full diner footage subpoenaed. We find other victims, because men like Victor Hale don't suddenly start harassing waitresses at age 43. There's always a pattern. We make sure that every time someone Googles his name, this incident comes up. We make the cost of pursuing you greater than the satisfaction of punishing you. It sounded good. Almost too good. Why would you do this pro bono? What's in it for you? David laughed, but there was no humor in it. You want the honest answer? I'm tired of watching rich assholes use the legal system as a cudgel against ordinary people trying to do the right thing. I'm tired of justice being something you can only afford if you're already wealthy. And I'm really, really tired of guys like Victor Hale getting away with whatever they want because everyone's too scared or too broke to stand up to them. His voice softened. Plus, my sister was a waitress once. Had a customer grab her almost exactly like what happened to you. Everyone looked away. No one helped. She quit that night and never went back to service work. So yeah, this one's personal for me. Ethan made his decision in the space between heartbeats. When can we meet? Tonight, if you're free. My office is small and probably not what you're used to for legal representation, but I'll be there. Text me the address. One more thing, Mr. Cole. This is going to get ugly. Mr. Hale has already started the media campaign against you. It's only going to intensify. He's going to try to paint you as unstable, dangerous, a threat. He's going to dig into your military service, your divorce, every mistake you've ever made. Are you prepared for that? Ethan thought about Sophie, about the life he was trying to build for her, about whether he could afford to fight back or afford not to. I stopped a man from hurting someone who couldn't defend herself, he said quietly. If I have to be destroyed for that, at least I'll be destroyed for something worth defending. Good, David said, and Ethan could hear the smile in his voice. Then let's give Mr. Hale a fight he wasn't expecting. I'll see you tonight. The rest of the shift passed in a haze. Ethan's phone kept buzzing with notifications, his name trending on social media, strangers with opinions about his character and motives, the internet's infinite capacity for judgment based on incomplete information. He turned the phone off and focused on the work. When his shift ended, he headed straight to the address David had texted him. The public advocacy clinic was located in a repurposed storefront in a part of town that developers hadn't discovered yet. The windows were covered with posters about tenant rights and workers' protections. Inside, young attorneys with idealistic eyes worked at mismatched desks covered in case files. David Park was exactly what Ethan had pictured. Late 20s, rumpled suit that had seen better years, wire-rimmed glasses slightly crooked on his face, and the kind of intensity that came from believing the law could actually be used for good if you tried hard enough. They shook hands, and David led him to a small conference room that smelled like old coffee and determination. All right, David said, spreading out papers across the table. Let's talk about how we're going to win this thing. For the next 2 hours, they built a strategy. Every witness would need to be interviewed again, properly this time. The video would need to be analyzed frame by frame. Victor Hale's background would need to be investigated for patterns of behavior, and they needed to find Lena. She's the key, David explained. She can confirm everything. Her testimony establishes motive and pattern. Without her, this is still winnable, but with her, it's airtight. She disappeared, Ethan said. The police couldn't find her. The name she used was fake. Then we figure out her real name. We track her down. David's phone rang, cutting him off. He glanced at the screen and his expression shifted to confusion. Excuse me, I need to take this. He stepped out of the conference room, leaving Ethan alone with the case files and the growing certainty that this situation was far more complicated than a simple diner confrontation. When David returned 5 minutes later, his face had gone pale. That was a colleague who works in corporate law. He just got a very interesting call. David sat down heavily. A law firm representing an unnamed client wants to retain our clinic to represent you. They're offering to cover all costs, provide additional resources, and ensure you have access to the best possible defense. Why? That's the question, isn't it? David stared at his phone like it might provide answers. The attorney wouldn't say who the client was, just that they have a vested interest in ensuring you receive proper legal representation and that Victor Hale doesn't succeed in using the legal system to punish you for defending someone. Ethan thought about the text messages from Lena, who wasn't Lena, the promise that he wouldn't face this alone. Did they give any other information? Just one thing. The attorney said to tell you that Elle keeps her promises. The silence in David Park's conference room stretched like a wire pulled too tight, vibrating with questions neither man wanted to ask first. Ethan stared at the scattered case files while his mind raced through implications and possibilities, each one stranger than the last. A waitress with a fake name who'd vanished into thin air. A mysterious benefactor willing to fund an expensive legal defense. A promise delivered through encrypted channels that disappeared after one use. David broke the silence first, his voice careful and measured in a way that suggested he was thinking several moves ahead. "So you know who she really is?" It wasn't a question. Ethan met his eyes and saw a sharp intelligence there that he'd initially underestimated. David Park might work out of a converted storefront with mismatched furniture, but he hadn't gotten there by being slow to connect dots. "I don't," Ethan said honestly. "But I'm starting to think I defended someone a lot more important than a diner waitress." "The question is whether that makes this situation better or worse for you." David leaned back in his chair, which creaked in protest. On one hand, having powerful allies who want to help is obviously advantageous. On the other hand, powerful people who hide their identities usually have complicated reasons for doing so, and those complications have a way of becoming other people's problems. "She didn't ask for my help," Ethan pointed out. "I made the choice to step in. Whatever happens next is on me." Noble sentiment, legally irrelevant. David pulled his laptop closer and started typing. "But if someone with serious resources wants to bankroll your defense, I'm not going to tell them no. Not when the alternative is watching Victor Hale's legal team steamroll you into bankruptcy and possibly jail time." He paused, fingers hovering over the keyboard. "The question is whether we accept their help with no strings attached, or whether we find out who they are first." Before Ethan could answer, David's phone buzzed with an incoming email. He opened it, his eyes widening as he read. Then he turned the laptop around so Ethan could see the screen. The email was from a law firm Ethan had heard of, even in his limited exposure to legal matters. Whitmore, Chen & Associates, one of the most prestigious firms in the city. The message was brief and professional, outlining their offer to provide full legal representation at no cost to Ethan, with unlimited resources allocated to his defense and any subsequent civil actions. Attached was a retainer agreement already signed by the unnamed client, along with a secure video conference link scheduled to activate in exactly 5 minutes. "Well," David said, glancing at the clock, "I guess we're about to find out who your mysterious benefactor is." The 5 minutes crawled by like hours. David spent them pulling up everything he could find on Whitmore, Chen & Associates, muttering observations under his breath. Top-tier firm. They represent tech companies, Fortune 500 executives, occasionally celebrities who've gotten themselves into serious legal trouble. Their hourly rate starts at $800 for associates. Partners are twice that, and they want to represent you for free. When the laptop chimed with the incoming video call, both men leaned forward. David clicked accept, and the screen filled with the image of a woman in her 50s, impeccably dressed, sitting in an office that probably cost more to furnish than Ethan made in a year. Behind her, floor-to-ceiling windows revealed a nighttime cityscape that placed her somewhere in the financial district's highest towers. "Mr. Cole, Mr. Park, thank you for taking this call. My name is Margaret Chen, senior partner at Whitmore, Chen & Associates. I've been retained to represent Mr. Cole in all matters related to the incident at the Bluebird Diner and any subsequent legal actions." Her voice carried the kind of authority that came from decades of winning arguments in rooms where billions of dollars hung in the balance. But there was something else there too, something that might have been respect or possibly curiosity. "Ms. Chen," David began, his voice professional despite the surreal nature of the situation. "We appreciate the offer, but we have some questions about who's funding this representation and why." "I'm sure you do." Margaret's smile was polite, but revealed nothing. "Unfortunately, my client has requested anonymity at this time. What I can tell you is that they have a vested interest in ensuring Mr. Cole receives excellent legal representation and that Victor Hale's attempt to weaponize the legal system against him fails spectacularly and publicly." "That's not much to go on," Ethan said quietly. "Why should I trust you?" "You shouldn't. Not blindly." Margaret pulled out a physical folder, holding it up to the camera. "But you should consider the alternative. As of this afternoon, Victor Hale has filed a civil suit against you seeking $5 million in damages for assault, emotional distress, and defamation. His attorneys have also been in contact with the district attorney's office, pushing for criminal charges. They've launched a coordinated media campaign painting you as a violent, unstable veteran with a history of aggression, and they've contacted your employer, your daughter's school, and several of your neighbors with carefully worded questions designed to build a case that you're a danger to the community." The words hit Ethan like physical blows. My daughter's school? They sent an investigator posing as a social services representative to ask about your fitness as a parent. Margaret's expression hardened. That particular move crossed a line, which is why I'm even more motivated to bury them. But the point is, Mr. Cole, you're not just facing a legal challenge. You're facing a coordinated assault from someone with unlimited resources and absolutely no conscience about collateral damage. David had gone pale. They can't just harass his daughter. They can do anything that isn't explicitly illegal, and even then, they'll push right up to that line and sometimes over it, betting that you won't have the resources to fight back. Margaret set the folder down. That's how people like Victor Hale operate. They don't just want to win. They want to destroy you so thoroughly that you serve as a warning to anyone else who might think about standing up to them. Ethan felt something cold and familiar settling in his chest, the same feeling he'd had in combat zones when the situation shifted from dangerous to potentially catastrophic. What do you want in return? My client wants 3 things. First, they want you to accept our representation with no conditions or reservations. Second, they want you to fight this case publicly and aggressively, holding nothing back. And third, when this is over, they want you to tell the truth about what happened that night, regardless of any settlement offers or non-disclosure agreements Victor Hale might propose. That's it? David sounded skeptical. No hidden clauses? No requirements that he stay silent about your client's identity? My client believes the truth is about to become very public regardless, Margaret said. But they'd prefer to control the timing and narrative. For now, all you need to know is that Elena Vaughn is tired of hiding. The name hung in the air like a bomb that hadn't yet detonated. Ethan saw David's fingers already flying across his keyboard, searching, and watched as recognition dawned on his face. Elena Vaughn, David said slowly, as in Richard Vaughn's daughter, as in the Vaughn Technologies heiress, as in one of the wealthiest families in the country. Margaret's expression didn't change, but something flickered in her eyes that might have been satisfaction. As I said, my client prefers anonymity for now. But hypothetically speaking, if a young woman from an extraordinarily wealthy family wanted to understand what normal life looked like, she might take a job as a waitress under an assumed name. And if something happened to her in that context, she might feel a certain obligation to the person who helped her. Ethan's mind raced back to the diner, to Lena's face when Victor had grabbed her wrist, to the fear in her eyes that he'd assumed was about the immediate danger, but might have been about something far more complicated. A billionaire's daughter working in a dive diner, hiding from recognition, living a life so far removed from her reality that no one would think to look for her there. Why? He asked. Why would someone with everything pretend to have nothing? That, Margaret said, is a question you'll have to ask her yourself. What matters right now is that she wants to make this right. She wants to ensure you don't suffer because you did what any decent person should have done. And she wants Victor Hale to face consequences for his actions. She leaned closer to the camera. So, Mr. Cole, will you accept our representation? Ethan looked at David, who gave a small shrug that said the decision was entirely his. Then he thought about Sophie, about the investigator at her school asking questions designed to make him look dangerous, about the articles already spreading across the internet calling him violent and unstable, about the legal fees he couldn't afford and the fight he couldn't win alone. Yes, he said, but on one condition. Margaret raised an eyebrow. You're not exactly in a position to negotiate conditions. I want to meet her. Lena, whatever her name is. I want to hear from her directly why she's doing this and what she expects in return. No lawyers, no intermediaries, just her telling me the truth. For a long moment, Margaret was silent, and Ethan wondered if he'd just made a catastrophic tactical error. Then she smiled, and it was the first genuine expression he'd seen from her. She said you'd ask for that. In fact, she'd be disappointed if you didn't. Margaret typed something on her keyboard. There's a car waiting outside your current location. It will take you to a secure location where Ms. Vaughn is waiting. Mr. Park, you're welcome to accompany him if you'd like, though I should warn you both that what you're about to hear is going to fundamentally change your understanding of this situation. David looked at Ethan with an expression that asked whether they were really about to get into a strange car to meet a billionaire's daughter, based on nothing but trust and desperation. Ethan stood up, his decision already made. Let's go, he said. The car waiting outside was exactly what Ethan expected. A black SUV with tinted windows and a driver who said nothing as they climbed in. David spent the ride Googling Elena Vaughn on his phone, muttering facts and figures under his breath. 26 years old, Stanford graduate, degree in social psychology. Sits on the board of Vaughn Technologies in a non-voting capacity. Estimated personal net worth of $9 billion, most of it in trust funds and stock options. Last public appearance was 6 months ago at a charity gala. Since then, nothing. Radio silence. David looked up from his phone. She disappeared. Everyone assumed she was traveling or taking a break from public life, but she was working in a diner under a fake name. Why? Ethan asked again, though he wasn't sure he expected an answer. Maybe that's what we're about to find out. The SUV pulled up to a building in the historic district, one of those converted warehouses that now housed million-dollar lofts. The driver led them through a private entrance, up an elevator that required a key card, and into a penthouse that occupied the entire top floor. The space was beautiful in that minimalist way that required enormous wealth to achieve, all clean lines and expensive materials pretending to be simple. Floor-to-ceiling windows revealed the city sprawling in every direction, a carpet of lights that looked almost peaceful from this height. Elena Vaughn stood by the windows, her back to them, wearing jeans and a simple sweater that probably cost more than Ethan's monthly rent, but looked deliberately casual. When she turned around, Ethan recognized Lena's face immediately, but everything else about her had changed. The careful invisibility she'd worn at the diner was gone, replaced by something more confident, more present, more real. "Mr. Cole," she said, and her voice was different too, educated and precise in a way she'd hidden before. "Thank you for coming. I owe you an explanation and an apology, though I'm not sure in which order." "Start with the truth," Ethan said. "Who are you, really, and what the hell am I in the middle of?" Elena gestured to a seating area with furniture that was probably designed by someone famous and uncomfortable in that way expensive things often were. She waited until they were all seated before speaking. "My name is Elena Vaughn. My father is Richard Vaughn, founder and CEO of Vaughn Technologies. I am, as you've probably already discovered, extremely wealthy and extremely sheltered and extremely tired of living a life where I never know if people are responding to me or to my last name." She paused, choosing her words carefully. 6 months ago, I decided to find out what my life would look like if I was just Elena. Nobody important, nobody special, just another person trying to get by. So I rented a cheap apartment under a fake name, got a job that paid minimum wage, and learned what it's like to worry about rent and groceries and whether I could afford to get sick. "Why?" David asked, his journalist instincts kicking in. "Because I sit on a board that makes decisions affecting thousands of workers I've never met. Because I donate millions to charities serving people whose lives I don't understand. Because I was tired of being theoretical about poverty and struggle and wanted to know what it actually felt like." Elena's voice tightened. "And because my father is in the middle of a hostile takeover attempt by a consortium of investors who think Vaughn Technologies should prioritize profits over everything else, including ethics, and I wanted to understand what happens to normal people when corporations make those kinds of decisions." Ethan was starting to see the shape of something larger. Victor Hale is part of that consortium. Victor Hale is the consortium's legal counsel and their point person for aggressive acquisition strategies, Elena confirmed. "He's also been pursuing me romantically for 2 years, despite my very clear and repeated rejections. My father thinks it's harmless. I think it's predatory. And when I refused his latest advance at a company event 3 months ago, he made it very clear that he doesn't handle rejection well." "So him being at that diner wasn't coincidence," David said. "I don't know." Elena's expression showed genuine uncertainty. "I've been so careful. New name, new neighborhood, no social media, no credit cards, nothing that could be traced back to who I really am. But Victor is the kind of man who hires private investigators and doesn't let go of things he thinks he's entitled to. It's possible he found me. It's also possible it really was just terrible luck that he happened to be there that night. Either way, when I grabbed your wrist, I painted a target on my back," Ethan said. "When you defended me, you did something most people wouldn't." Elena met his eyes directly. "Everyone else in that diner looked away. They saw what was happening and chose their own safety over mine. But you stood up. You put yourself between me and someone who could hurt you in ways you couldn't even imagine. And now Victor is trying to destroy you, not because you actually did anything wrong, but because you embarrassed him, because you showed him that money and power don't make you immune to consequences. And you feel guilty, Ethan guessed. I feel responsible. There's a difference. Elena stood, pacing toward the windows. If you'd known who I was, you might have made a different choice. You might have calculated the risk differently. But I robbed you of that choice by hiding who I am, and now you're paying the price for my deception. I would have done the same thing, Ethan said quietly. Even if I'd known. Even if I'd known everything. Because the calculation doesn't change based on who someone is. It changes based on whether they need help and whether I can provide it. Elena turned back to him, and there was something raw in her expression. Most people don't think like that. Most people haven't seen what I've seen. The silence that followed was heavy with things unsaid. Finally, David cleared his throat. So what happens now? Victor Hale is coming after Ethan with everything he has. How do we stop him? We don't stop him, Elena said. We let him attack. We let him file his lawsuits and spread his lies and do all the things he's planning to do. And while he's busy trying to destroy Ethan, we gather evidence about his pattern of harassment, his history of using legal threats to silence victims, and his role in the hostile takeover attempt against my father's company. Then, when he's fully committed, when he thinks he's won, we expose everything publicly and systematically dismantle both his reputation and his legal strategy. That's a big risk, David pointed out. If something goes wrong, Ethan could end up in jail or bankrupted or both. Which is why Margaret Chen is one of the best attorneys in the country, and why we're giving her unlimited resources to fight this battle. Elena looked at Ethan. I won't lie to you. This is going to be brutal. Victor will dig into every aspect of your life. He'll find mistakes you've made, relationships that ended badly, moments you're not proud of. He'll try to paint you as everything from a violent criminal to an unfit father. And he'll do it all very publicly, very aggressively, betting that you'll break before he does. And if I don't break, then we win. Not just the legal case, but something more important. We prove that ordinary people can stand up to bullies with unlimited resources. We show that doing the right thing doesn't have to mean being destroyed for it. And we make Victor Hale an example of what happens when powerful people think they're above consequences. Ethan thought about Sophie, about the life he was trying to build for her, about whether he could afford to be the symbol of something larger than his own survival. But he also thought about the other waitresses Victor had probably harassed, the other people he'd probably threatened, the pattern of behavior that continued because no one had the resources to stop it. What do you need from me? Courage, honesty, willingness to let us fight this battle publicly instead of accepting a quiet settlement. Elena sat back down across from him. Victor will offer you money to go away. A lot of money, probably. Enough to solve your immediate problems and give Sophie a better life. But that money will come with a price, your silence. An NDA that prevents you from ever speaking about what happened, that erases the truth in exchange for financial security. And if I take it, then Victor learns he can assault women and threaten witnesses and use the legal system as a weapon, and the only consequence is writing a check. Then he does it again to someone else who might not have a billionaire's daughter willing to fight back. Then the pattern continues. Elena's voice was steady but intense. I'm asking you to turn down financial security for you and your daughter in order to fight for something abstract and difficult and maybe impossible. I'm asking you to trust that doing the right thing will somehow work out, and I know how unfair that is. Ethan looked at David, who shrugged helplessly. Then he thought about Sophie and the rainbow she'd drawn, about Mrs. Chen and her kindness, about Carl at the warehouse who'd stood by him when it would have been easier not to. He thought about all the ordinary people who made small choices every day to be decent when the world rewarded the opposite. I'll do it, he said, but I have conditions. Elena raised an eyebrow, a gesture that reminded Ethan powerfully of Margaret Chen. Name them. First, Sophie's protection is non-negotiable. Whatever happens, my daughter stays out of this. No investigators near her school, no media attention, nothing that makes her a target. Agreed. We'll have security monitoring her school and your apartment building. Discreet, invisible, but present. Second, I want regular updates on everything that's happening. No lawyer games, no information kept from me to protect me. This is my life. I deserve to know what's being done with it. You'll have full access to all strategy sessions and case files. Third, when this is over, however it ends, I want the truth published. Not spin, not public relations, not a carefully managed narrative. The actual truth about what happened and why. Even if it makes me look bad. Even if it's complicated. Elena smiled, and it was the first time Ethan had seen genuine warmth in her expression. You sound like someone who's been lied to by people claiming to protect you. I've been in situations where the truth got classified for national security, Ethan said, where the official story was very different from what actually happened. I'm done with that. If we're fighting for something, we're fighting for the truth. All of it. Deal. Elena extended her hand and they shook on it, a gesture that felt strangely formal given everything they'd just discussed. Then her expression shifted to something more serious. There's one more thing you need to know. Tomorrow morning, Victor's media campaign is going to intensify significantly. He's arranged for interviews with 3 different news outlets, all of them featuring a carefully edited version of the security footage that makes you look violent and aggressive. He's also planning to hold a press conference where he'll announce the civil suit and frame himself as a victim of random violence. So we need to get ahead of the story, David said, his mind already working on strategy. We need to do more than that. We need to completely change the narrative before he can establish his version as truth. Elena pulled out her phone and sent a message to someone. Which is why, tomorrow morning, I'm going to reveal my real identity and exactly what happened that night. I'm going to explain who I am, why I was working at that diner, and what Victor Hale actually did. And I'm going to dare him to sue me for defamation if he thinks my account is inaccurate. That's incredibly risky, David warned. Once you go public, there's no taking it back. You'll lose the privacy you've been trying to protect. Every aspect of your life will become fair game for media scrutiny. I know, but staying silent makes me complicit in what Victor is trying to do to Ethan, and I'm done being complicit. Elena stood, signaling that the meeting was ending. My father doesn't know I'm doing this yet. He's going to be furious, but he's also going to realize that Victor Hale sexually harassed his daughter and then tried to destroy the witness who defended her. And my father does not react well to threats against his family. Ethan stood too, feeling like he'd just agreed to something far larger and more complicated than he'd understood. What happens if this doesn't work? If Victor's resources and connections are too much even for you? Then we lose, and Victor learns he really is untouchable. Elena met his eyes with an intensity that reminded him of combat, of moments when everything hung in the balance and the only choice was to commit fully or retreat. But I don't think we're going to lose. I think Victor Hale has been getting away with this behavior for so long that he's forgotten other people can fight back. And I think he's about to get a very expensive education in why you shouldn't underestimate people just because they're not rich. The ride back to David's office was quiet, both men processing everything they'd just learned. When they finally pulled up outside the public advocacy clinic, David turned to Ethan with an expression somewhere between excitement and terror. You realize we just agreed to go to war with one of the most powerful corporate attorneys in the city, backed by a consortium of investors who probably have connections everywhere from City Hall to the police department to the media. I've been to war before, Ethan said. At least this time the enemies are wearing suits instead of carrying rifles. Don't underestimate how dangerous people in suits can be. They might not shoot you, but they can destroy your life just as effectively. David paused, then smiled slightly. But they've never fought someone who has a $9 billion ally who's tired of playing nice. This is going to be interesting. Ethan made it home just after midnight. Sophie was asleep, her breathing deep and even, the stuffed elephant clutched tight against her chest. He stood in the doorway watching her for a long moment, wondering what kind of world he was fighting to create for her. His phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number, though this time he suspected it would keep working. Thank you for meeting with me. Thank you for agreeing to fight, and thank you for being the kind of person who stands up when everyone else looks away. Tomorrow's going to be difficult, but we'll face it together. Sleep well, Ethan. You're going to need it. Elena. He sent back a simple response. See you on the battlefield. Then he lay down on his mattress on the floor, staring at the ceiling and thinking about the strange chain of events that had led from a rainy night in a diner to a penthouse meeting with a billionaire's daughter. About how one choice, one moment of refusing to look away, had cascaded into something far larger than he could have imagined. Tomorrow, Elena Vaughn would reveal her identity to the world and challenge Victor Hale to a very public fight. Tomorrow, the media would descend like locusts, hungry for a story that combined wealth, power, assault, and a working-class veteran caught in the middle. Tomorrow, his life would become a spectacle, whether he wanted it to or not. But tonight, Sophie was safe and sleeping. Tonight, he'd made an alliance with someone who had the resources to actually fight back. And tonight, for the first time since walking into that police station, Ethan felt something that might have been hope. Sleep came eventually, filled with dreams of combat zones and courtrooms bleeding together, of Sophie's rainbow drawing somehow protecting him from bullets made of legal documents, of Elena standing in that diner again, but this time not hiding, not pretending, just being exactly who she was and daring anyone to touch her. When he woke to his alarm at 5:30, the city was still dark and quiet, holding its breath before the storm that was about to break. Ethan made coffee with hands that were steady despite everything, checked on Sophie one more time, and prepared himself for the day when everything would change. His phone was already filling with notifications. Elena's press conference was scheduled for 9 a.m. Margaret Chen had sent over a briefing document about what to expect and how to handle media inquiries. David had forwarded 3 articles from early morning news sites speculating about the Bluebird Diner incident and Victor Hale's planned lawsuit. But there was one notification that stood out from all the others, an email from an address he didn't recognize with a subject line that made his blood run cold. "You should have stayed down." The message itself was brief and unsigned. "Whatever you think you're doing, whatever you think you know, it won't matter. She can't protect you from what's coming. Neither can her lawyers or her money or her name. You put your hands on the wrong person. Now you're going to learn what that costs, starting with everyone you love." Ethan deleted the message immediately, but the words had already burned themselves into his memory. A threat. Not subtle, not ambiguous. A promise that this fight wasn't going to stay in courtrooms and conference rooms. He forwarded the email to Margaret Chen and David Park with a simple note. "Received this 5 minutes ago. Thought you should know." Margaret's response came within 60 seconds. "Screenshot everything. Save the email. Do not respond. Do not engage. We're documenting all of this. And Ethan, the security we placed on Sophie's school is already active. She's safe. Trust us." Ethan wanted to believe her, wanted to trust that money and lawyers and good intentions could protect his daughter from people who'd just threatened everyone he loved. But he'd learned in places soaked with blood and desperation that the only person you could really trust to protect the ones you cared about was yourself. So he made a decision that Margaret Chen probably wouldn't approve of, and David Park would definitely argue against. He started documenting everything himself, creating his own backup of emails and text messages and every interaction, storing them in multiple places, both digital and physical. Because if this fight was going to get ugly, if Victor Hale and his consortium were willing to threaten a 7-year-old girl to win, then Ethan was going to make absolutely certain that the truth survived, even if he didn't. The sun was starting to rise, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink that seemed almost obscenely beautiful given what the day would bring. Sophie would wake in an hour. He'd make her breakfast, walk her to the bus stop, hug her tight without explaining why, and send her off to a school that now had invisible security watching for threats. Then he'd come back to an apartment that suddenly felt less like a sanctuary and more like a target, and he'd wait for 9 a.m. when Elena Vaughn would step in front of cameras and transform this from a personal conflict into something much larger and far more dangerous. 3 days ago, he'd been nobody. A struggling single father working 2 jobs and trying to give his daughter a decent life. A veteran trying to forget wars that wouldn't forget him. A man whose biggest concern was making rent and keeping Sophie fed, and maybe, if he was lucky, finding 5 minutes of peace in a diner between shifts. Now he was at the center of a battle between billionaires and corporate raiders, his name spreading across the internet, his life being dissected by strangers, his daughter potentially in danger because he'd refused to look away when everyone else did. And the worst part, The thing that kept him awake, even as exhaustion pulled at him like a riptide, was the certainty that this was only the beginning. The real war hadn't even started yet. Sophie's voice cut through Ethan's racing thoughts like a bell in the darkness, clear and innocent and utterly unaware of the threats circling their small life like sharks sensing blood. "Daddy, you're making the sad coffee face again." Ethan looked up from his phone, where he'd been staring at the threatening email for the 15th time, trying to memorize every word, every pattern, searching for clues about who'd sent it. Sophie stood in her pajamas decorated with planets and stars, her dark hair tangled from sleep, holding the stuffed elephant under one arm. "Sorry, sweetheart. Just thinking about work stuff." He forced himself to smile, to be present, to not let the fear show. "Want pancakes this morning instead of cereal?" Her eyes lit up with the kind of pure joy that only children could manufacture from simple promises. "With chocolate chips?" "Absolutely. Go get dressed and I'll start cooking." She disappeared back behind the curtain that divided their small apartment, singing something off-key about planets and breakfast. Ethan moved mechanically through the familiar routine of making pancakes, the normalcy of it almost painful in its contrast to everything else happening. Flour, eggs, milk from the carton that was 2 days from expiring, chocolate chips from the bag he'd been saving for a special occasion, because if ever there was a morning that qualified, it was this one. By the time Sophie emerged dressed for school, the apartment smelled like butter and chocolate and temporary safety. They ate together at the folding table, Sophie chattering about a project on the solar system while Ethan listened with half his attention, the other half monitoring his phone for updates from Margaret Chen's team. The walk to the bus stop felt different this morning. Ethan found himself scanning faces, looking for surveillance, for threats, for anyone paying too much attention to a single father and his daughter heading to school like thousands of other families across the city. He saw nothing obvious, but that didn't mean nothing was there. "Daddy, you're squeezing my hand too tight." He loosened his grip immediately, kneeling down to Sophie's eye level when they reached the bus stop. Other parents were already gathering, none of them aware that the man standing among them had received a death threat 3 hours ago and was about to become the center of a media firestorm. "Sophie, I need you to promise me something." Her expression grew serious in that way children do when they sense their parent is worried about something real. "Okay. If anyone you don't know tries to talk to you at school or asks you questions about me or our family, I want you to tell your teacher immediately. Don't answer them. Don't be polite. Just go straight to Mrs. Anderson and tell her. Can you do that?" "Is someone going to try to talk to me?" Fear crept into her voice, and Ethan hated himself for putting it there. "Probably not. But I want you to know what to do just in case. Like we practice fire drills even though there's probably not going to be a fire. It's just being prepared." Sophie considered this with the gravity of someone weighing serious matters. "Are you in trouble, Daddy?" "I did the right thing, and sometimes when you do the right thing, it makes people upset. But I promise you, everything is going to be okay." "You always say that." "Because it's always true. Eventually." The school bus rumbled up, its yellow paint bright against the gray morning sky. Sophie hugged him tight, her small arms fierce around his neck, and whispered, "Love you, Daddy, even when you make the sad coffee face." Then she was gone, climbing onto the bus with her backpack and her elephant and her innocent trust that her father could protect her from anything. Ethan watched the bus pull away, wondering if he'd just lied to his daughter or made a promise he could actually keep. His phone buzzed. Margaret Chen. "Press conference in 90 minutes. You should watch it live. The link is in this email. Prepare yourself. It's going to be intense." The walk back to his apartment took him past the diner where this had all started. The Bluebird was closed at this hour, its windows dark, the neon sign turned off. Someone had taped a handwritten note to the door, closed until further notice due to unforeseen circumstances. Even the location itself had become collateral damage. Inside his apartment, Ethan opened his laptop and pulled up the live stream link Margaret had sent. The screen showed an empty podium in what looked like a hotel conference room, professional camera angles, a backdrop with the Vaughn Technologies logo. The chat beside the video was already filling with speculation and commentary from people who had no idea what they were about to witness. At exactly 9 a.m., Elena Vaughn walked into frame. She wore a simple navy suit that probably cost thousands of dollars, but looked understated, professional. Her hair was pulled back, her makeup minimal, her expression composed in a way that suggested steel underneath the polish. She looked nothing like Lena from the diner, and everything like the heiress to a technology empire. Behind her, slightly to the side, stood Richard Vaughn. Ethan recognized him from business magazines and news articles, a man in his 60s with silver hair and the kind of presence that filled rooms without effort. His expression was difficult to read, somewhere between proud and furious. Elena stepped up to the podium, adjusted the microphone, and looked directly into the camera with eyes that Ethan remembered from that night in the diner when she'd been terrified and trapped, and trying to maintain her composure. "Good morning. My name is Elena Vaughn, and I'm here to tell you about what happened to me 4 nights ago at a diner called the Bluebird." The chat beside the video exploded with comments, the view count jumping from hundreds to thousands in seconds. Elena didn't pause, didn't acknowledge the sensation she was creating. "For the past 6 months, I've been living under an assumed name, working a minimum wage job, trying to understand what life looks like for the millions of Americans who don't have the advantages I was born with. I rented an apartment I could barely afford. I worried about making rent. I learned what it feels like to be invisible, to be dismissed, to be treated as less than by people who saw only my uniform and not my humanity." Her voice was steady, measured, but there was emotion underneath it that cameras couldn't quite capture, but somehow transmitted anyway. 4 nights ago, a man came into the diner where I was working. His name is Victor Hale. He's a corporate attorney, a man of significant wealth and influence, and someone who has been pursuing me romantically despite my repeated rejections for over 2 years. I don't know if he recognized me that night, or if his behavior was simply how he treats all service workers, but what I do know is that he harassed me, grabbed my wrist when I tried to walk away, and refused to release me when I asked him to stop. The conference room was absolutely silent, except for Elena's voice. In the background, Richard Vaughn's expression had shifted to something cold and dangerous. No one in that diner moved to help me. Not the other customers, not the manager, nobody. Everyone saw what was happening and chose their own safety over mine. Everyone except one man, a single father named Ethan Cole. A veteran who was sitting in the corner drinking coffee between work shifts stood up and asked Victor Hale to let me go. When Victor refused and became aggressive, Ethan defended both of us with exactly the amount of force necessary to end the threat and no more. Elena pulled out her phone, swiped a few times, and the screen behind her lit up with security footage from the diner. Not the edited version Victor's team had been shopping to news outlets, but the complete uncut recording with timestamps and crystal clear audio. This is the actual footage from that night. Not edited, not manipulated, exactly what happened in chronological order. I'm releasing this to all media outlets immediately so you can see for yourselves what occurred. The footage played on the screen behind her. Ethan watched himself on camera, saw the confrontation unfold from a different angle, heard his own voice saying, "Let her go," with that calm certainty that seemed to come from someone else. He saw Victor's hand on Elena's wrist, saw her trying to pull away, saw the moment when Victor reached for him and he defended himself with controlled precision. When the footage ended, Elena continued speaking. In the days following that incident, Victor Hale has launched a coordinated campaign to destroy Ethan Cole's life. He's filed a $5 million lawsuit for assault despite being the aggressor. He's contacted Ethan's employer trying to get him fired. He's sent investigators to Ethan's daughter's school asking questions designed to paint him as an unfit parent. He's spread lies through media outlets about Ethan being violent and dangerous. And this morning, Ethan received a threatening email suggesting that people he loves will be targeted if he doesn't back down. The room erupted in murmurs. Reporters started shouting questions. Elena held up one hand for silence. "I'm showing you this footage and telling you this story not because I want sympathy or attention. I'm doing it because Victor Hale represents a pattern of behavior that has been allowed to continue for far too long. Powerful men who believe their wealth and connections make them immune to consequences. Men who harass women and then use the legal system as a weapon against anyone who dares to intervene. Men who think they can intimidate and threaten and destroy ordinary people who don't have the resources to fight back." She paused, and when she spoke again, her voice carried an edge that could cut glass. But here's what Victor Hale didn't know when he chose to target Ethan Cole. He didn't know that the waitress he harassed was Richard Vaughn's daughter. He didn't know that I have resources that match or exceed his own. And he didn't know that I have been documenting his pattern of harassment and intimidation for the past 2 years, waiting for the right moment to expose it. Behind her, Richard Vaughn stepped forward slightly, his expression making it clear that whatever reservations he might have had about his daughter's unconventional social experiment, threatening her had erased them entirely. Elena continued, "Over the past 72 hours, my attorneys have gathered testimony from 11 other women who Victor Hale has harassed, threatened, or assaulted in various contexts over the past decade. Women who were too afraid to come forward because of his power and connections. Women who signed non-disclosure agreements in exchange for settlements that bought their silence but not their safety. Women who are now willing to speak publicly because they've learned they're not alone." The screen behind her changed to show a grid of photographs, faces blurred for privacy, but clearly real people. 11 women of different ages, different backgrounds, different contexts, a pattern impossible to dismiss as coincidence or misunderstanding. Additionally, we have evidence that Victor Hale has been using confidential information obtained through his legal work to facilitate the hostile takeover attempt of Vaughn Technologies. He's been feeding sensitive company information to the consortium he represents, violating attorney-client privilege and potentially multiple securities laws. That evidence has been turned over to the appropriate regulatory authorities as of this morning. Ethan sat frozen in front of his laptop, watching Elena systematically dismantle Victor Hale's entire existence in real time. This wasn't just defending him, this was total war, executed with the precision of someone who'd been planning it for a long time and was just waiting for the right catalyst. "So let me be absolutely clear about what happens next," Elena said, her voice dropping to something quieter but somehow more intense. "Victor Hale can continue his lawsuit against Ethan Cole if he wishes. But if he does, every piece of evidence I've just described will be entered into the public record. Every woman he's harassed will testify. Every threatening email will be published. Every unethical action will be exposed. His reputation, his career, his freedom, all of it will be destroyed far more thoroughly than he could ever destroy one working-class veteran." She leaned closer to the microphone, speaking directly to the camera, directly to Victor Hale, wherever he was watching. "Or he can drop all charges, issue a public apology, resign from his position with the consortium, and accept whatever consequences the Bar Association and regulatory authorities decide are appropriate for his actions. Those are his two options. There is no third path. There is no settlement. There is no buying silence this time. Only accountability or exposure. He has 24 hours to decide." The conference room erupted in chaos. Reporters shouted over each other. Cameras flashed. The live stream chat scrolled so fast it was unreadable. Elena stood at the podium, calm and still as the storm broke around her. Then Richard Vaughn stepped up to the microphone, and the room quieted immediately. His voice when he spoke carried decades of commanding boardrooms and billion-dollar negotiations. "I want to add one thing to my daughter's statement. When someone threatens my family, when someone harasses my child and then tries to destroy the person who defended her, they make an enemy of everything I've built. Vaughn Technologies will be severing all business relationships with Victor Hale and the consortium he represents, effective immediately. Furthermore, I'm personally funding a legal defense fund for anyone who needs resources to fight back against abuse of the legal system by wealthy individuals. No one should have to face bankruptcy because they did the right thing." He looked directly into the camera, his expression absolutely merciless. "Mr. Hale, you picked the wrong waitress, and you definitely picked the wrong witness to intimidate. My daughter is right. You have 24 hours. Choose wisely." The press conference ended with Elena and Richard walking off the stage together, ignoring the shouted questions that followed them like birds screaming at a departing storm. Ethan sat in his apartment staring at the screen long after it cut to a news anchor struggling to process what they'd just witnessed. His phone started ringing immediately. Margaret Chen. "Did you watch it?" "Every second." "Then you know the situation has fundamentally changed. Victor Hale is currently in an emergency meeting with his attorneys trying to figure out damage control. The district attorney's office has already called to say they're declining to file criminal charges based on the full evidence. And we're receiving calls from 3 different news outlets asking if you'll do interviews." "What should I do?" "Nothing. Absolutely nothing. Let the story breathe. Let people process what Elena just revealed. Your silence right now is more powerful than anything you could say. Margaret's voice softened slightly. How are you holding up? I feel like I just watched someone drop a nuclear bomb to defend me. That's an accurate assessment. Elena Vaughn doesn't do anything halfway. When she commits to a battle, she commits completely. A pause. The threatening email you received this morning? We traced the IP address. It came from a computer at Victor Hale's law firm. He's not just going down for harassment. He's going down for witness intimidation, which is a criminal offense. Ethan felt something loosen in his chest, some knot of fear he'd been carrying since reading those words about everyone he loved. Sophie's safe? Sophie's safe. The school has been briefed by our security team. She's being watched by people who are very good at staying invisible. Nobody's getting near her. After Margaret hung up, Ethan sat in the quiet of his apartment listening to the city wake up outside his window. Somewhere out there, Victor Hale was watching his entire life collapse. Somewhere out there, 11 women were probably feeling the complicated mixture of vindication and trauma that came with finally being believed. Somewhere out there, Elena Vaughn was dealing with the consequences of sacrificing her privacy to protect a stranger. His phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number, though by now he recognized Elena's pattern of burner phones and disposable contact methods. I'm sorry I couldn't warn you about how public this was going to get, but I couldn't risk Victor learning about it in advance. Are you okay? Ethan typed back, Why did you do all this? You could have just paid him off quietly, made the problem go away without destroying him. The response came after a long pause. Because problems don't go away. They just get transferred to the next victim who doesn't have a billionaire's daughter willing to fight back. Because I'm tired of watching powerful men face no consequences. And because you stood up for me when you thought I was nobody. The least I could do was stand up for you the same way. Another message followed immediately. Also, my father is absolutely furious with me for the secret waitress experiment, but he's more furious with Victor for harassing me. So this is going to be an interesting family dinner conversation. Despite everything, Ethan found himself smiling slightly. He typed, Thank you for all of it, even the nuclear bomb part. Especially the nuclear bomb part. Sometimes the only way to stop bullies is to show them they're not the most dangerous person in the room. How's Sophie? Safe? At school, completely unaware that her father is currently trending on social media. Let's keep it that way as long as possible. She doesn't need to know about any of this until it's over. The day crawled forward with agonizing slowness. Ethan tried to work his shift at the warehouse, but Carl sent him home after 20 minutes, pointing out that having media vans camped outside was bad for business, and Ethan's mind was clearly elsewhere anyway. Take the week off, Carl said. Paid, and don't argue with me. You stood up for someone who needed help. I'm not going to punish you for that, and I'm definitely not going to make you work while dealing with all this. Ethan spent the afternoon in his apartment, avoiding social media but unable to avoid the news coverage that was spreading like wildfire. Elena's press conference was being replayed on every major network. Legal experts were analyzing Victor Hale's position, most of them agreeing that his situation was essentially hopeless. Business reporters were discussing the implications for the Vaughn Technologies takeover attempt, which was apparently collapsing now that its legal architect had been publicly exposed as a serial harasser. And then there were the think pieces, the hot takes, the commentary from people who'd never been in a diner facing down a drunk businessman but had very strong opinions about what Ethan should have done differently. Some called him a hero. Others questioned whether physical intervention was appropriate. A few suggested the whole thing was staged, a conspiracy between Elena and Ethan to destroy Victor Hale for unrelated reasons. Ethan stopped reading after the fifth article suggested he was probably in a romantic relationship with Elena, and this was all some elaborate scheme to extort money from Victor. The internet's capacity for creative fiction apparently had no limits. At 3 p.m., his phone rang with a number he didn't recognize. He almost didn't answer, but something made him pick up. Mr. Cole, my name is Thomas Wright. I'm a senior partner at Victor Hale's law firm. I'm calling to inform you that Mr. Hale has decided to drop all legal actions against you, effective immediately. He will be issuing a public apology this evening and resigning from his position with several clients, including the consortium attempting to acquire Vaughn Technologies. The words should have brought relief, but instead Ethan felt only a hollow kind of satisfaction. What changed his mind? I suspect it was the 11 women prepared to testify about his pattern of behavior, or the evidence of attorney-client privilege violations, or the witness intimidation charges, or possibly the realization that fighting Elena Vaughn and Richard Vaughn simultaneously was a battle he could not win. A pause. For what it's worth, Mr. Cole, you did the right thing that night. I wish more people had your courage. You worked with him for years. Did you know? The silence on the other end was answer enough. Finally, Thomas Wright said quietly, I suspected, but suspecting and acting on those suspicions are different things, and now I have to live with that choice. Congratulations on your victory, Mr. Cole. I hope it brings you some measure of peace. The call ended. Ethan sat holding his phone, thinking about all the people who'd suspected, who'd looked away, who'd chosen their own comfort over someone else's safety. Thinking about how many Lenas there might have been before this one, how many times Victor Hale had gotten away with it because no one with resources to fight back had witnessed it. By the time Ethan met Sophie at the bus stop that afternoon, the first wave of media frenzy had begun to recede. Victor Hale's public apology was scheduled for 6 p.m. The Bar Association had announced an investigation. The SEC was looking into the securities violations, and 11 women were finally being believed after years of forced silence. Sophie bounced off the bus, chattering about her solar system project, completely unaware that her father had just been at the center of a battle that had destroyed a powerful attorney's entire career. She showed him a drawing of Jupiter with too many moons, and he told her it was perfect. That evening, they made spaghetti together in their tiny kitchen, Sophie standing on a chair to help stir the sauce while Ethan's phone buzzed continuously with messages from reporters, from David Park celebrating the victory, from Margaret Chen forwarding legal documents confirming that all charges had been dropped, and one message from Elena. It's over. You're free. Victor Hale just held his press conference apologizing and resigning from everything. The criminal investigation is proceeding based on the evidence we provided. And most importantly, Sophie never has to know how close this came to destroying your life. Thank you for being someone worth fighting for. Ethan typed back. Thank you for being someone who fights. Not everyone with your resources would have used them this way. Not everyone with your courage would have stood up in that diner. I think we're even. After dinner, after Sophie's homework was done and her teeth were brushed and she was tucked into bed with her elephant, Ethan finally allowed himself to sit down and process everything that had happened. 4 days ago, he'd been nobody, a struggling single father trying to survive. Now he was the center of a national news story, the catalyst that had brought down a powerful attorney, the symbol of standing up to bullies with resources. But tomorrow, he'd go back to being nobody again. Back to working at the warehouse, back to worrying about rent and groceries, back to the ordinary struggles of ordinary life. And somehow, that felt exactly right. His phone buzzed one last time. David Park. Just got word that 3 different organizations want to hire you for security positions based on your handling of the diner situation. All of them pay better than the warehouse. Also, someone wants to option your life rights for a movie, which is insane but potentially lucrative. Call me tomorrow. We should talk about your future. Ethan smiled slightly, set the phone aside and looked around his small apartment with its secondhand furniture and Sophie's rainbow drawing still taped to the refrigerator. A future that involved better pay and actual security sounded good. A future where Sophie didn't have to worry about whether they could afford rent sounded even better. But the real victory, the one that mattered more than money or job offers or media attention, was simpler than that. He'd done the right thing, and for once, the right thing hadn't destroyed him. For once, standing up for someone who needed help had actually worked out. For once, the good guys won. The weeks that followed Victor Hale's public downfall moved with the strange rhythm of a life transforming in ways Ethan hadn't anticipated. Some changes came quickly, arriving like summer storms that reshaped the landscape in hours. Others crept in slowly, small shifts that accumulated into something significant only when he looked back and realized how far he'd traveled from that rainy night in the diner. The first major change came 3 days after Elena's press conference, when Ethan sat across from Marcus Chen, head of security for a mid-sized tech company that had been courting him since David Park forwarded his contact information. Marcus was in his 50s, former military himself, with the particular bearing of someone who'd seen combat and carried those lessons into civilian life. I'll be honest with you, Mr. Cole. Marcus said, reviewing Ethan's application with careful attention. We need someone who understands threat assessment, who can make decisions under pressure, and who has the judgment to know when intervention is necessary versus when observation is sufficient. What you did at that diner demonstrates all three qualities. I just did what anyone should have done, Ethan said, uncomfortable with the praise he'd been receiving from strangers who seemed to think defending someone made him extraordinary rather than just decent. Except almost nobody does it. That's the problem. Marcus set down the application. We've had 3 incidents in the past year where employees were harassed or threatened, and security personnel either didn't notice or didn't consider it their responsibility. I'm building a team that understands protection isn't just about physical security systems. It's about creating an environment where people feel safe enough to do their work without looking over their shoulders. The salary Marcus offered was nearly double what Ethan made at the warehouse, with benefits that included health insurance that actually covered things, and enough paid time off that he might occasionally take Sophie somewhere beyond the local park. It was the kind of financial stability that had existed only as abstract possibility before, something other people had but never him. There's one condition, Marcus added. The position requires occasional evening and weekend work. We'd need flexibility from you, which I understand might be difficult with a young daughter. Ethan thought about Sophie, about the delicate balance of childcare and work schedules that defined his life. I'd need to arrange backup care for those times. My neighbor, Mrs. Chen, helps when she can, but she's not always available. The company has a child care assistance program. We can help subsidize reliable care or provide on-site options during evening events when you need to be present. Marcus smiled slightly. We're trying to build a workplace that accommodates actual human lives. Not just the fantasy version where everyone is available 24/7 with no other responsibilities. Ethan accepted the position before he could second-guess himself into finding reasons why it wouldn't work. The conversation with Carl at the warehouse the next day was easier than expected. I figured this was coming, Carl said, not unkindly. You've got better options now. Can't say I'm happy to lose you, but I'd be a jerk to stand in your way. You've earned this, Cole. The job doesn't start for 2 weeks. I can stay until then, help train whoever replaces me. Appreciate that. But take a few days first, spend time with your kid. Sleep past 5 a.m. for once. You look like you haven't had a full night's rest since this whole thing started. Carl was right. Ethan had been operating on adrenaline and anxiety for so long that his body had forgotten what actual rest felt like. That night, after telling Sophie about his new job in terms she could understand, Daddy's going to help keep people safe at their work. He slept for 10 uninterrupted hours and woke feeling almost human. The second major change came from an unexpected source. Detective Sarah Morrison called one afternoon while Ethan was helping Sophie with a math worksheet that had defeated them both with its bizarre word problems about trains traveling in opposite directions. Mr. Cole, I wanted to update you on Victor Hale's situation. The criminal investigation has expanded significantly based on evidence that surfaced during the Bar Association's inquiry. What kind of evidence? The kind that suggests Mr. Hale's behavior was more extensive and more calculated than even Ms. Vaughn's team initially realized. We've identified 17 additional victims beyond the 11 who came forward publicly. Some of these incidents date back over 15 years. We're building a case that includes multiple counts of assault, harassment, witness intimidation, and abuse of his position as an attorney. Ethan felt something cold settle in his stomach. 17 more women. 17 more people who'd been hurt and silenced, who'd carried that weight alone because speaking up seemed impossible against someone with Victor's resources. Will they all have to testify? Some will. Others have provided written statements and evidence that corroborates the pattern without requiring them to relive their trauma in a courtroom. Morrison's voice softened. What you did, Mr. Cole, what Ms. Vaughn did by going public, it opened a door for these women. They saw that someone with power was willing to stand up to Victor Hale, and it gave them permission to come forward with their own stories. You started something that's going to have consequences far beyond one diner confrontation. After the call ended, Ethan sat staring at Sophie's math worksheet without seeing it. 17 more. How many others might there be who still hadn't come forward, who were watching from the shadows wondering if it was safe to speak up, if they'd be believed, if the cost of truth was worth paying. "Daddy, you're making the sad coffee face again," Sophie said, her voice pulling him back to the present. "Are the trains too hard?" "The trains are definitely too hard," Ethan agreed, managing a smile. "Let's figure out why anyone needs to know when these trains will meet if they're going opposite directions anyway." Life settled into new patterns. The warehouse shifts ended and the security position began, and Ethan found himself in an environment so different from his previous work, it felt like moving to another planet. His new colleagues were professionals who talked about threat assessments and protocols, who treated security as a skilled discipline rather than just standing around looking intimidating. The company offices were clean and well lit, with break rooms that had actual coffee instead of the burnt sludge from the warehouse, with bathrooms that didn't require a tetanus shot to enter safely. But the biggest difference was the respect. People listened when he made suggestions about security improvements. His military experience was valued rather than being something to tiptoe around or exploit. When he mentioned needing to leave early one afternoon for Sophie's parent-teacher conference, his supervisor simply said to put it on the calendar and make up the hours later. No drama, no guilt trip, just accommodation of the fact that employees had lives outside work. The parent-teacher conference itself brought its own revelation. Mrs. Anderson, Sophie's teacher, was a woman in her early 40s with the particular warmth that suggested she'd chosen teaching because she actually liked children, rather than just tolerating them for a paycheck. "Sophie is doing wonderfully this year," Mrs. Anderson said, pulling out a folder of Sophie's work. "Her reading comprehension has improved significantly, her math skills are right on track, and she's very well liked by her classmates." "That's great to hear." Ethan relaxed slightly, the parental anxiety that preceded every school meeting dissipating. "There is one thing I wanted to mention, though nothing concerning." Mrs. Anderson pulled out a drawing, one of Sophie's characteristic works with bright colors, an enthusiastic disregard for realistic proportions. This one showed two figures standing together, one tall and one small, both holding hands. Above them, Sophie had written in careful letters, "My daddy is a hero because he helps people who are scared." Ethan stared at the drawing, something tight forming in his throat. "She did this during a lesson about community helpers," Mrs. Anderson explained. "She talked about how you stood up for someone who needed help, even though it was hard. The other children were very impressed. Several of them have been drawing pictures of their own family members doing helpful things." "She knows about what happened?" Ethan had tried so hard to shield Sophie from the media coverage, from the ugliness of legal battles and public accusations. "Only what you must have told her, that you helped someone, and that good people do that." Mrs. Anderson smiled. "Mr. Cole, whatever details Sophie doesn't know, she knows the important part. She knows her father is someone who stands up for others. That's the lesson she's carrying forward, not the complicated adult things that surround it." Ethan took the drawing home and taped it to the refrigerator next to the rainbow, these small pieces of Sophie's understanding of the world forming a constellation of hope on aging metal. The third major change came from Elena herself, though it arrived through careful channels and official invitations rather than burner phones and disappearing text messages. Richard Vaughn was hosting an industry event, a gathering of technology leaders and advocates to discuss workplace safety and accountability. Ethan received a formal invitation in the mail, embossed paper and careful calligraphy that spelled out his name with the kind of attention usually reserved for people far more important than former warehouse workers. David Park called him the same day the invitation arrived, excitement making his voice faster than usual. "Are you seeing this? Richard Vaughn doesn't do small events. This is going to be every major player in the tech industry, along with labor advocates and policymakers. And you're invited as a guest of honor." "Why would I be a guest of honor? I didn't do anything except grab someone's wrist." "You did something most people won't do even when they have all the power and resources in the world. You intervened when intervention was costly. That matters to people who are trying to change systems." David paused. "Elena's going to be there. This will be the first time you've seen each other in person since the press conference. Are you ready for that?" Ethan wasn't sure he was ready for any of this. The invitation sat on his folding table for 3 days while he debated whether attending would be stepping into a world where he didn't belong or accepting recognition he'd earned. Finally, Sophie made the decision for him. "Is that a fancy party invitation?" she asked, pointing at the embossed envelope while Ethan was making dinner. "Sort of. It's a work event." "Do you have fancy work clothes?" "Not really." Sophie considered this seriously. "Mrs. Chen says when someone invites you to something special, you should go because it means they think you're important. Are you important, Daddy?" "I don't know, sweetheart. Sometimes I think I'm just lucky." "Lucky people who help others should go to fancy parties," Sophie declared with the absolute certainty of 7-year-old logic. "So you should go." Ethan borrowed a suit from Marcus, who was close enough to his size that the alterations were minor. The night of the event, Mrs. Chen came to watch Sophie, refusing payment despite Ethan's protests. "You helped that girl when no one else would," she said firmly. "I help your daughter, while you go accept recognition for being a good person. This is how community works. We take care of each other." The venue was a historic hotel that Ethan had passed 1,000 times but never entered. The kind of place where the doormen wore uniforms nicer than anything in his closet, and the marble floors probably cost more per square foot than his annual rent. He felt immediately out of place among people in designer clothes discussing stock options and venture capital, but David Park found him quickly and guided him through the crowd. "Don't let them intimidate you," David said quietly. "Half these people made their money by being in the right place at the right time. You earned your invitation by having the courage to do the right thing when it was hard. That counts for more." The event space was enormous, decorated with understated elegance that whispered rather than shouted its expense. Round tables surrounded a stage where speakers would presumably discuss workplace safety in theoretical terms that would never quite capture what it felt like to be grabbed by someone with power while everyone watched and did nothing. Ethan found his assigned table near the front, his name on a small card next to plates that probably weren't supposed to be touched with normal human hands. The other seats at his table were empty at first, then gradually filled with people who introduced themselves with impressive titles and warm handshakes. Then Elena appeared. She wore a deep blue dress that managed to be both elegant and understated, her hair down in waves that softened her appearance. But her eyes when they met Ethan's were the same ones from the diner, intelligent and direct and carrying the weight of someone who'd learned that hiding was sometimes necessary but never comfortable. "Mr. Cole," she said formally, extending her hand. "It's good to see you again." "Ms. Vaughn." He shook her hand, aware of the dozens of people watching this interaction, cataloging it for whatever social currency such observations held. "Thank you for the invitation." "Thank you for coming. I know this probably isn't your usual environment." She sat down next to him, and the formality dropped slightly. "How's Sophie?" "Good. She drew a picture of me being a hero. It's possibly the most embarrassing and wonderful thing that's ever happened to me." Elena's smile was genuine and reached her eyes. "I'd like to see that picture sometime, if that's okay." "You're welcome to visit any time, though I should warn you, our apartment is about the size of your closet." "I've seen your apartment. I lived in one similar for 6 months, remember? I know exactly how big closets are when you're actually paying rent with money you earned." She paused as servers began placing salads in front of them, delicate arrangements of greens that looked too artistic to eat. "How are you really doing? The job change, the attention, all of it?" "Better than I expected, worse than I hoped. Mostly just trying to figure out what normal looks like now that everything's changed." "I understand that feeling." Elena picked up her fork but didn't eat, just studied the salad like it might contain answers. "I can't go back to being anonymous now. Everyone knows who I am, what I did, why I did it. The social experiment is over, and I'm back to being Richard Vaughn's daughter, whether I want that or not." "Do you regret it?" "No. But I miss the parts of being Lena that felt real. The simplicity of just doing a job and going home. The conversations with customers who saw me as just a waitress, not a potential business connection. The way people treated me when my last name didn't matter." She finally took a bite of salad, chewed thoughtfully. "But I don't regret exposing Victor. And I don't regret that 11 women, 17 women, however many there end up being, finally get to tell their truth without being destroyed for it." The dinner proceeded through multiple courses, each more elaborate than the last, while speakers took the stage to discuss workplace safety initiatives and accountability measures. Some talks were good, thoughtful examinations of power dynamics and systemic change. Others were corporate platitudes dressed up as social consciousness, beautiful words that would lead to nothing but more meetings and reports that no one would read. Then Richard Vaughan took the stage. He commanded attention without demanding it, his presence filling the enormous room simply by existing in it. When he spoke, his voice carried the authority of someone who'd built an empire, but also the humility of someone who'd learned that empires meant nothing if the people within them weren't protected. 3 weeks ago, my daughter was harassed by a man I trusted professionally, someone I'd invited into business relationships and social circles. She was grabbed, threatened, and objectified by someone who thought his position and connections made him immune to consequences. And when she cried for help, everyone in that diner looked away. Everyone except one man. Richard paused, looking directly at Ethan. Ethan Cole is here tonight, not because he's wealthy or connected or powerful. He's here because when he saw someone who needed help, he didn't calculate the risks or consider the costs. He simply acted. And in doing so, he exposed a pattern of abuse that had continued for over 15 years, affected dozens of women, and persisted because good people chose silence over action. The room was absolutely quiet except for Richard's voice. We talk a lot in this industry about disruption, about innovation, about changing the world. But the truth is, most of us are cowards when it counts. We see injustice and we look away because intervention is complicated, because it might cost us something, because we tell ourselves it's not our responsibility. Ethan didn't have the luxury of those excuses. He just had a choice between doing what was right and doing what was safe. He chose right. Richard gestured, and a screen behind him lit up with images, faces of women whose stories had emerged in the aftermath of Elena's press conference. Some were willing to be identified, their names and photographs shared with permission. Others were blurred, anonymous but present. These are the women Victor Hale hurt over 15 years. Each of them was isolated, alone, convinced that speaking up would cost them everything, and they were probably right. Until one man in a diner decided that protecting a stranger was more important than protecting himself. That single act of courage gave all of them permission to come forward, to tell their truth, to demand accountability. The screen changed to show statistics, numbers about workplace harassment, about how rarely it was reported, about how even more rarely consequences followed. Then it changed again to show a new initiative. Tonight, I'm announcing the Vaughan Foundation's Workplace Safety Initiative, a $100 million commitment over 5 years to provide legal support, advocacy, and protection for workers who face harassment, assault, or abuse. We're funding hotlines, legal clinics, advocacy organizations, and support systems. We're working with legislators to strengthen protections and close loopholes that allow abusers to escape consequences through settlements and non-disclosure agreements. The room erupted in applause. Richard waited for it to quiet. But money isn't enough. Systems aren't enough. What we need are more people like Ethan Cole, people who see wrong and refuse to look away. People who understand that doing the right thing is sometimes expensive and always worth it. People who remember that behind every statistic is an actual human being who deserves dignity and safety. Richard stepped away from the podium and walked directly to Ethan's table, extending his hand. Mr. Cole, on behalf of my daughter and everyone she's inspired to come forward, thank you. Your courage changed more lives than you'll ever know. Ethan stood, shook Richard's hand, and felt the weight of 1,000 eyes on him. He wanted to disappear, to deflect, to explain that he wasn't special or heroic, just someone who'd made a choice that any decent person should make. But Sophie's drawing flashed through his mind, her careful letters spelling out that her daddy was a hero, and he realized that maybe it didn't matter whether he felt heroic. Maybe what mattered was that a 7-year-old girl learned that helping people who were scared was what good people did. I just did what anyone should have done, Ethan said, his voice steady despite the attention. The real heroes are the women who came forward despite being afraid. They're the ones who deserve recognition. Then let's recognize all of you, Richard said, and the screen behind him changed again to show the full list of women who'd spoken up, whose courage had compounded and created something larger than any individual act. The rest of the evening blurred into conversations and handshakes, and people wanting to know his story, to tell him their stories, to explain how what he'd done had mattered in ways he hadn't anticipated. A woman in her 30s with tears in her eyes told him about being harassed at her last job and staying silent because she needed the paycheck. A young man described watching his mother suffer workplace abuse and feeling powerless to help. A corporate executive admitted that he'd witnessed harassment and convinced himself it wasn't his place to intervene, and how watching the diner footage had made him ashamed of his own cowardice. David Park stayed close, occasionally running interference when conversations got too intense or personal. Elena drifted through the crowd, but kept returning to their table, her presence both commanding attention and somehow creating a buffer of space where Ethan could breathe. Near the end of the evening, when the formal program had concluded and guests were mingling with coffee and desserts that were probably too beautiful to eat, Elena guided Ethan onto a balcony overlooking the city. The night air was cool, traffic sounds drifting up from streets below, the city lights spreading in every direction like a map of millions of lives intersecting in ways they'd never fully understand. "I'm moving back into my real life," Elena said after a long moment of comfortable silence. "Back to board meetings and charity galas and all the things that come with being a Vaughn. But I'm doing it differently now. I know what minimum wage feels like. I know what it's like to worry about rent and whether I can afford to get sick. I know what it's like to be invisible except when men decide to notice you. And I'm never forgetting those lessons." "What will you do with them?" "Change things. Use my position and resources to make sure other people don't have to face what I faced without support. Push my father's company to be better, to treat workers like humans instead of resources. Fund organizations that help people who don't have billionaire daughters to defend them." She turned to face him directly. "And stay connected to the reality of what life looks like for most people. No more pretending I understand poverty from the comfortable distance of wealth." "You could have just written checks," Ethan pointed out. "You didn't have to work in a diner and risk getting hurt to learn those lessons." "But I needed to. I needed to know, not just theoretically understand. There's a difference between sympathy and empathy, between helping from distance and actually inhabiting someone else's reality." Elena smiled slightly. "Plus, I'm apparently terrible at taking orders from customers. That was a useful thing to learn about myself." They stood together in companionable silence, two people whose lives had intersected in the most unlikely way and emerged on the other side changed in ways they were still processing. Below them, the city continued its endless movement, millions of stories unfolding simultaneously, most of them invisible to everyone except the people living them. "Sophie asked if you could visit sometime," Ethan said finally. "She wants to show you her planet drawings." "I'd like that. If it's really okay." "You're always welcome. Fair warning, though, our apartment doesn't have balconies with city views. It has something better. It has a kid who draws rainbows and thinks her father is a hero. That's worth more than any view." 3 months later, on a Saturday morning that felt more like spring than winter had any right to, Ethan and Sophie met Elena at the park where they'd spent countless afternoons feeding ducks and climbing on playground equipment that had seen better decades. Elena arrived in jeans and a sweater, driving herself in a normal car rather than arriving in a chauffeured vehicle, making the effort to meet them in their world rather than summoning them to hers. Sophie took to her immediately with the uncomplicated acceptance of children who haven't yet learned to be intimidated by wealth or status. She showed Elena her collection of rocks from the playground, explained the complex rules of the game she'd invented involving monkey bars and imaginary lava, and demanded that Elena push her on the swings high enough to touch the clouds, but not so high that she'd fly away. Ethan watched from a bench, sipping coffee from the thermos he'd brought, and feeling something like contentment settle into the spaces where anxiety usually lived. His new job was going well. Sophie was thriving in school. The legal nightmares had resolved into something resembling justice. Victor Hale was facing criminal charges and had lost his law license, his reputation, and most of his fortune to legal fees and settlements. The 11 women who'd come forward publicly, plus the 17 who'd done so privately, were being supported by the Vaughn Foundation's initiative and receiving the therapy and legal assistance they needed. And here in this park, on this ordinary Saturday, a billionaire's daughter was pushing a 7-year-old on a swing while laughing at something the child had said about clouds being cotton candy factories. "Higher!" Sophie shrieked with pure joy. "Any higher and you'll visit the moon," Elena called back, but she pushed harder anyway. A figure approached the bench where Ethan sat, and he looked up to see an older man in casual clothes, his face vaguely familiar in that way that suggested Ethan had seen him before but couldn't place where. "Mind if I sit?" the man asked. "It's a public park." The man sat, pulled out his own thermos, and poured coffee that smelled considerably better than Ethan's grocery store brand. They sat in silence for a moment, watching Elena and Sophie, before the man spoke again. "My name is Harold Chen. We met once before, in a diner during a rainstorm." Recognition clicked into place. The old man at the counter, the first witness who'd spoken up, who'd said clearly and firmly what he'd seen despite it being easier to stay silent. "Mr. Chen, I wanted to thank you for speaking up that night. You didn't have to." "Yes, I did. Not legally, perhaps, but morally, absolutely." Harold sipped his coffee. "I'm 83 years old, Mr. Cole. I've lived through more history than most people read about. I've seen what happens when good people stay silent because intervention is uncomfortable. I've seen whole societies fall apart because everyone chose their own safety over collective responsibility." That seems pretty heavy for a diner confrontation. "All the big things are built from small moments. Every genocide started with people looking away from smaller injustices. Every civil rights movement started with individuals who decided they'd had enough of staying silent." Harold gestured toward Elena and Sophie. "That girl there, the one laughing on the swings, she almost got hurt because a powerful man thought he could do whatever he wanted. And the only thing standing between him and consequences was whether anyone cared enough to intervene." "You're saying I'm some kind of hero for grabbing someone's wrist?" "I'm saying you're someone who remembered that other people matter. In a world that increasingly treats empathy as weakness and kindness as naivety, that's actually quite radical." Harold stood, his joints protesting slightly. "I come to this park every Saturday. I sit on this bench, and I watch children play, and I remember why any of this matters. Maybe I'll see you here again sometime." He walked away before Ethan could respond. Just another old man in a park full of families and joggers and people living their ordinary lives. But his words lingered, reframing everything that had happened in language that felt both too grand and somehow exactly right. Sophie and Elena returned from the swings, both slightly breathless, Sophie's cheeks flushed with exercise and joy. "Elena says she has a surprise," Sophie announced, "but she won't tell me what it is until you say it's okay." Ethan looked at Elena questioningly. "There's a program at the Science Museum," Elena explained. "It's an interactive exhibit about the solar system designed for kids Sophie's age. I thought maybe, if you're both free next Saturday, we could go together. My treat." Sophie's eyes went wide with the kind of excitement usually reserved for birthdays and holidays. "Can we, Daddy? Please?" "You don't have to do that," Ethan said to Elena. "I know I don't have to. I want to. Sophie's been teaching me about planets for the past hour, and I figure seeing them in 3 dimensions might be educational for both of us." Elena smiled. "Plus, I haven't been to a museum in months. I miss doing normal things with normal people." "We're not that normal," Sophie informed her seriously. "Daddy's a hero, and I can draw rainbows that have 8 colors instead of 7. That's pretty special." "You're absolutely right. I apologize for the error." Elena knelt down to Sophie's level. "So is next Saturday a date?" "It's a date!" Sophie threw her arms around Elena in an impulsive hug that made the billionaire's daughter's eyes go briefly wide with surprise before she hugged back. They spent the rest of the afternoon in the park, the 3 of them forming a strange little constellation in the chaos of families and joggers and people walking dogs. They had ice cream from a truck that had seen better years, the kind with freezer burn that somehow still tasted perfect on a day when everything felt right. They fed ducks with bread that Sophie insisted on breaking into exactly even pieces so no duck would feel left out. They lay on the grass looking at clouds, Sophie pointing out shapes while Elena and Ethan added increasingly ridiculous interpretations. "That one looks like a rabbit riding a motorcycle," Sophie declared. "I think it looks like a chef making spaghetti," Elena countered. "It's clearly a lawyer being chased by justice," Ethan added, then immediately regretted the joke. But Elena laughed, real and uninhibited. Too soon? Probably always too soon. As the sun started its descent toward the horizon, painting the sky in colors that Sophie immediately declared she needed to draw as soon as they got home, They packed up their things and prepared to leave. Elena walked them back to the bus stop, seeming in no hurry to return to whatever mansion or penthouse or world of wealth awaited her. "Thank you for today," she said as the bus approached. "I needed this more than you probably realize." "Thank you for pushing me on the swings really high," Sophie said seriously. "You're good at it." After they boarded the bus and found seats, Sophie pressed her face against the window to wave at Elena, who waved back until the bus turned a corner and they lost sight of each other. "I like her," Sophie announced. "She's not like the rich people in movies who are mean. She's nice." "She is nice," Ethan agreed. "Is she your girlfriend?" The question caught him completely off guard. "What?" "No, she's just a friend." "Okay, because Mrs. Chen says you should have a girlfriend so you're not lonely. But I think you're probably too busy being a hero to have a girlfriend." "I'm definitely too busy for that," Ethan said, ruffling her hair. "Plus, I already have the best girl in my life." Sophie grinned at him, gap-toothed and perfect, and Ethan felt his chest tighten with the particular ache of loving someone so much it physically hurt. The months continued to pass, seasons changing in the way they do when you're too busy living to notice, until suddenly the trees are different colors, and you need a jacket where before you didn't. Ethan's position at the security company became something he was actually good at, his instincts and experience translating well into the work of keeping people safe. He received a promotion after 6 months, then another one after a year. The raises weren't dramatic, but they were consistent, and Sophie's college fund that had been theoretical became something with actual money in it. Sophie thrived in school, her drawings evolving from simple rainbows to elaborate scenes featuring planets and people and occasional dragons that she insisted were scientifically plausible, even if nobody had discovered them yet. She made friends easily, invited them over to their apartment that was still small but no longer felt quite so much like poverty. She joined the soccer team and was terrible at it but loved it anyway, and Ethan stood on sidelines with other parents cheering at games where the score was mostly theoretical. Elena became a regular part of their lives in a way that felt natural rather than forced. She showed up for Sophie's birthday with a telescope that was age-appropriate but clearly expensive, teaching Sophie how to find constellations while Ethan tried not to calculate how much it cost. She attended one of Sophie's soccer games and cheered enthusiastically despite having no idea what was happening. She had dinner at their apartment monthly, bringing groceries that she'd cook alongside Ethan in their tiny kitchen, the two of them navigating the limited space while Sophie did homework at the folding table. "You don't have to keep doing this," Ethan said one evening while they were making stir-fry with vegetables that were definitely organic and probably cost more than his weekly grocery budget. "Doing what?" Elena asked, focused on cutting peppers with the kind of precision that suggested she'd taken cooking classes. "Spending time with us. Playing normal. You've got important things to do, boards to sit on, companies to run. This is the most important thing I do all week." She looked at him directly, her knife pausing mid-cut. "You and Sophie remind me why any of the other stuff matters. The board meetings and initiatives and policy changes, they're all abstractions until I remember there are actual people whose lives they affect. People like you, working hard and trying to give their kids better futures. That's not playing normal. That's staying connected to what's real." From the other room, Sophie called out, "What's 6 times 7? I know we learned this, but my brain forgot." 42, they both answered simultaneously, then laughed. "Your brain didn't forget, it's just taking a break," Elena added. "Try writing out the 6s 7 times and adding them up." "That seems like more work than just remembering," Sophie complained, but the sound of her pencil on paper suggested she was doing it anyway. The legal aftermath of Victor Hale's actions continued to unfold in courtrooms and settlements, and consequences that accumulated slowly but inexorably. He was convicted on multiple charges of assault and harassment, receiving a sentence that combined prison time with probation and mandatory counseling that everyone knew wouldn't fix whatever fundamental brokenness made him think he was entitled to other people's bodies. His law license was permanently revoked. The consortium's takeover attempt of Vaughn Technologies fell apart completely, the investors scattering to pursue easier targets. But more importantly, the women he'd hurt received validation and support and compensation that could never erase what happened, but at least acknowledged it. Several of them started a nonprofit focused on supporting harassment victims in legal battles they couldn't afford to fight alone. Elena provided funding and connections, helping them build something sustainable that would outlast the news cycle. David Park wrote a long-form article about the entire situation that was picked up by major publications and sparked conversations about workplace harassment, about the responsibility of witnesses, about how justice system failures create space for abusers to operate with impunity. He won an award for the piece and used his acceptance speech to point out that every word of the article was only possible because one person in a diner had refused to look away. Ethan received occasional interview requests from journalists and documentary filmmakers, all of whom wanted to turn his story into something larger than it was. He declined all of them, uncomfortable with the attention and the inevitable distortions that came from trying to compress complicated reality into neat narrative arcs. His life wasn't a story with a clear moral. It was just a series of choices, some good and some lucky, that had happened to intersect in ways that mattered. 2 years after that rainy night in the diner, Ethan stood in the parking lot of Sophie's elementary school watching the annual talent show. Sophie had insisted on participating despite having no discernible talents beyond enthusiasm, and she'd chosen to do a presentation about space exploration that consisted mostly of her showing drawings she'd made while reciting facts she'd memorized from library books. She was terrible at it in the way kids are terrible at things they love too much to do well, stumbling over words and holding her drawings upside down and forgetting entire sections of her presentation, only to remember them after she'd moved on to the next part. The audience of parents loved her anyway, applauding with the genuine warmth that comes from watching children try their hardest at something that doesn't matter except to them. When Sophie finished and took her bow, she caught Ethan's eye in the audience and beamed with pride at having completed something difficult. And Ethan felt something in his chest break open the way ice breaks in spring, all the accumulated weight of the past 2 years transforming into something lighter. After the show, he found Elena sitting near the back, having arrived late and stayed quiet to avoid drawing attention. "You came," he said, genuinely surprised. "She invited me. How could I say no?" Elena smiled. "Besides, I wanted to see her presentation. She's been telling me about it for weeks." They walked out together into the parking lot where parents were collecting children and offering congratulations and preparing to go home to bedtimes and homework and all the ordinary things that comprised actual life. "Can I ask you something?" Ethan said as they reached Elena's car. "Of course." "Do you ever regret it? Going public, giving up your anonymity, all of it?" Elena considered the question seriously, not rushing to answer. "I regret that it was necessary. I regret that we live in a world where a billionaire's daughter working as a waitress is newsworthy, rather than just someone trying to understand different perspectives. I regret that Victor Hale hurt so many people before someone finally stopped him. But do I regret standing up and telling the truth? No, never. Even though your life is completely different now, my life was always going to be different. I was never going to be Lena the waitress forever, but at least now I'm Elena Vaughn, who actually understands what she's advocating for, who knows what minimum wage means in practical terms, who remembers what it feels like to be grabbed by someone with power while everyone watches and does nothing. She unlocked her car, but didn't get in. And I got to meet you and Sophie, which I wouldn't trade for anything, including privacy. Sophie came running up then, still wearing the cardboard astronaut helmet she'd made for her presentation, nearly knocking into Elena with her enthusiasm. "Did you see? Did you see my presentation?" "I saw every second," Elena confirmed. "You were amazing, and your drawings of Mars were incredibly detailed. Daddy helped with the red color mixing. We used 3 different reds to get it right." Sophie grabbed both their hands. "Can we get ice cream to celebrate? The good kind, not the freezer burn kind from the truck?" "Sophie, we can't just invite ourselves," Ethan began. "I would love to get ice cream," Elena interrupted. "My treat. To celebrate your successful space presentation and your excellent color mixing skills." They went to an ice cream shop that was probably too expensive for casual Saturday visits, but that made each cone a small work of art. They sat at an outdoor table watching people walk by, Sophie chattering about her plans for next year's talent show, while ice cream dripped down her hand faster than she could lick it. "I think next year I'm going to do something about ocean animals," Sophie declared. "Because space is great, but we haven't explored the ocean enough either, and that seems unfair to the fish." "Very fair point," Elena agreed seriously. Ocean animals deserve equal representation in talent show presentations. Ethan sat watching the two of them discuss the relative merits of featuring octopi versus deep-sea jellyfish, and felt something like peace settle into the spaces where anxiety and fear had lived for so long. This wasn't the life he'd imagined when he was deployed overseas, when he was coming home to a marriage that was already ending, when he was working double shifts just to keep Sophie fed. But somehow it was better. Not because everything was easy now, or because money solved all problems, or because doing the right thing had been rewarded with happy endings, but because he'd made a choice in a diner to be the kind of person his daughter deserved to have raising her, and that choice had cascaded into something larger than he could have predicted. He'd helped someone who needed help, and in the process, he'd learned that doing the right thing didn't always destroy you. Sometimes it connected you to other people who were trying to do the same thing. Sometimes it built communities of people who refused to look away. Sometimes it changed laws and systems and the way people thought about their responsibilities to strangers. And sometimes it just meant sitting at an ice cream shop on a Saturday afternoon with a 7-year-old who was covered in chocolate and a billionaire's daughter who was laughing at something about jellyfish tentacles, both of them people he would have never known if he'd chosen safety over action. The sun was setting, painting the sky in colors that Sophie would definitely try to recreate later. The city continued its endless movement around them, millions of lives intersecting in ways they'd never fully understand. Somewhere out there, Victor Hale was serving his sentence and hopefully learning that consequences existed even for powerful people. Somewhere out there, the women he'd hurt were rebuilding their lives with support they'd never had before. And here, in this moment, Ethan Cole was exactly where he needed to be. Not famous, not wealthy, not anything special except a father and a friend, and someone who'd refused to look away when everyone else did. That was enough. It was more than enough. It was everything.